cold open. I stand on the broken rim of Stickney, boots dusted with powder that drifts like ash in slow motion. Mars splits the sky like a red blade, edge to edge, bright enough to paint the stone. Phobos is a hush pressed against the inside of my helmet, a pressure made of silence and small tremors. Beneath me, the plane shivers with microquakes I can feel through my soles. Something moves across that darkness, not fast, not slow, but certain. If it is only a rock, it should not feel like a thought. If it is not a rock, what exactly is crossing our night toward us? I breathe. My station is Phobos Beta, a scaffold of truss and cable clamped to fractured stone. I am the observer on duty, first person in and last person out, if the window holds. My kit is simple and unforgiving, a visible and near-infrared spectrometer covering 400 to 1000 nanometers, a radar in the X-band with a center frequency of 9.6 GHz, a 4-channel photometer tuned to Martian sky glow. One mistake and the window closes, one beat off tempo and we lose the past tonight. The trace arrives like a breath I did not expect. Timestamp 0913, universal time, phase angle 35 degrees, reflectance 2.1% at 530 nanometers, signal to noise ratio 13.2. On my display, a thin green wire pulses, then steadies. I lean closer and feel the animal's certainty that the wire is watching me back. The thought is wrong, yet it lands with weight. Across the magnetotail model, the object stays bright where it should dim, swimming along a contour that ought to eat light. That defiance looks like intent. I mark the track, whisper the numbers, and narrow the room until only breath and screen remain. In my head, steady. Then the timer knifes through my focus. Observation window, 47 seconds. The object will cross the deep night plume behind Mars at an altitude of about 6,000 kilometers above the surface. That plume is a curtain of charged dust and sputtered ions that can blind the spectrometer if the angle is wrong. I would like 1 minute. I get 47 seconds, not more. A blade is a blade when it is narrow. I keep it narrow. Still, the dynamics model scrolls numbers like rain beside the spectrometer panel. Predicted acceleration from drag and gravity is 0.0005 meters per second squared. Measured acceleration is 0.0012 meters per second squared. Delta A, the difference in acceleration, is 0.0007 meters per second squared. Positive, small, ridiculous almost, and real. Something pushes. No visible plume, no thermal sneeze, no line in radar brighter than stone. The vector changes as if a hand pressed just enough on a door already ajar. Hook, someone or something is trimming its path. I do not know why, only that the numbers refuse to lie. The change repeats, measured and calm. Check again. I strip the frame and scrub for glare, which is under 1%. Hot pixels are 0. Crosstalk sits below -60 decibels. 12 seconds to run the standard steps. Anchor the star field. Normalize the black level. Subtract background. Confirm with the radar channel. The trace holds. The numbers hold. The tightness in my chest loosens a notch, and I am grateful for that small mercy. Paranoia wastes oxygen, and oxygen is time. I call the lock in a steady voice. We keep our hands steady. The object rolls. I catch it as a yaw I want to throw away, a drift that could be nothing. Then the period locks in. 19.7 seconds. 2 degrees peak to peak. It runs for a packet of 5 cycles, then the curve goes flat, as if a hand stilled a toy. Messy for tumbling rock and too disciplined for random debris. It smells like a schedule. It smells like someone's checklist. It smells like a pilot. What is it measuring here that deep space could not give? The green spike at 530 nanometers could be a coating echo, a light curve trick, or nothing. My throat tightens, and I hold my breath without meaning to. Phobos shifts beneath me. Powder hisses over the rock like silk over teeth. I plant stance and call the lock. The word leaves before ceremony can catch it. Lock the target. We are on a clock, and the object is writing a line in the sky we read now or never read. When history blinks, do not blink with it. It is measuring us. Do not take your headset off. 5 minutes before the window opens. 09:25 Universal Time. I stand in the console's muted green and breathe on the beat of the checklist. Our window opens at 09:30 and stays open for 47 seconds. The Mars Relay Coordinator holds the final go or no-go, but on Phobos Beta, my voice binds the chain. I speak each step like a rung on a ladder. Time sync, instrument sync, mind sync. We do not waste words because words are oxygen. We have a rule for this moment. Say only what moves the needle. I repeat the aim out loud so the walls can hear it. Catch the object. Keep the geometry clean. Keep the sensors honest. 47 seconds is a corridor, not a cushion. If we stumble, the door shuts. If we keep cadence, the door stays open. The numbers will bite or bless. Tonight, the geometry is a chalk line on a nightboard. The object will skim the deep night plume behind Mars at a grazing angle that keeps the planet's limb outside the spectrometer slit. Altitude about 6,000 kilometers above the surface. Phase angle 35 degrees, drifting less than half a degree during the pass. From here, the path looks like a pencil held to a ruler, single stroke, no wiggle. 47 seconds is not an estimate, it is the shape of the corridor. The corridor is narrow because the plume can blind the glass if we stray. We stay off the limb, shy of danger, riding a line that tolerates no slop. Hold the edge, hold the angle. Team on station. Mission design is Rhea Lowell, a quiet voice with a clockmaker's patience. Planetary defense is KG Morita, who turns panic into lists and lists into habit. Astrobiology is Sahana Ortiz, who distrusts hope as much as she distrusts easy data. I keep the sensors honest and the clock honest. Our rule is one sentence, one idea. Rhea calls geometry and timing. KG guards keep out zones and safe pointing margins. Sahana flags potential biosignatures and hunts false positives before they bloom. I speak numbers, Rhea speaks vectors, KG speaks limits, Sahana speaks doubts. The cadence is set so even a cough feels off script. We rehearse breathing, we rehearse silence, then we rehearse the handover. I say frame, Rhea says track, KG says clear, Sahana says log. Every word is a switch. Every switch must land clean. No jokes, no tangents, no poetry until the corridor closes. The corridor will close. Until then, we are a metronome. Pre-window checks roll like drumbeats. Visible and near-infrared spectrometer. Stabilized. Wavelength solution within 0.02 nanometers. Slit temperature steady. Focus confirmed on calibration lamp. Radar in the X-band. Center frequency 9.6 GHz. Noise figure nominal. Transmitter quiet. Receiver clear. Phase reference locked. Photometer 4-channel. Gain set. Dark current below threshold. Field stops aligned. Pointing cross-checked. Signal to noise ratio thresholds. We record if the ratio stays above 10 on 2 consecutive frames. We record anyway if the ratio spikes above 12 even once. Buffer space is green. Timestamps are synchronized within 1 millisecond. The mount slews through a square and returns to center to prove it can. I read each line and let rhythm carry room into the same lane. The point is not speed. The point is frictionless motion. Risks on the table. The magneto-tail plume is a tangle of charged dust and sputtered ions that can turn a spectrometer into a mirror aimed at its own lamp. Grain impacts can throw spikes into photometer channels. Ionized wakes can bend radar phase in tricks that look like velocity. Mitigation is geometry and patience. We bias the slit edge away from the limb by a whisper. We limit exposure length so smear cannot outrun signal while we beat noise. We keep radar in listen, ready to pulse if the trace dives under 1% reflectance. We stagger frame times to dodge resonances. We keep the mount warm enough to avoid jitter and cool enough to avoid glow. Risk does not vanish. Risk is managed until the corridor lets us pass. Scenario A is the simplest and the likeliest bruise to pride. If the object fades under 1% reflectance, we risk chasing dreams. If reflectance drops below 1, I lean on radar channel and step the spectrometer exposure up in careful increments. priority becomes acceleration over color because motion lies less often than paint. We log velocity residuals and compare them to predicted drag plus gravity sum every 5 seconds. If the signal-to-noise ratio falls under 8 for 10 seconds, we tag the run as tentative and save the rest for a second pass when the geometry returns. Hook here is discipline. Let loss be loss instead of building castles on fog. KG owns the call to abort collection if the plume lights us up. Ria owns the call to step the pointing off the limb by a hair to buy margin. Sahana owns the call on whether any spectral wiggle earns a caution flag or a shrug. Scenario B is the one that sets teeth on edge because meaning tries to sneak through the back door. If delta A, the difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration, turns positive, we lock the axis and widen the record. The roll signature at 19.7 seconds with 2 degrees peak to peak becomes a priority, especially if it repeats in packets of 5 cycles. We watch for any coordinated shift in the reflectance curve while the roll runs because a coupled shift smells like intent. We tunnel the radar onto the specular glint to test if the phase modulates closely in step with the roll packet. If phase, roll, and reflectance hum, we have a system. If only one hums, we have noise dressed as song. I call the numbers flat so no one hears me leaning. Ria sticks to geometry. KG guards keep out zones. Sahana keeps a hand on the meaning brake. If someone is flying, someone is measuring us, here, now, on Mars's night. Scenario C is the green band puzzle that keeps knocking. If the reflectance peak near 530 nanometers rises and falls periodically, we interrogate the cadence. First, we kill shutter harmonics by varying exposure in prime numbers. Then we kill plume flicker by bracketing around the limb with geometry fixed. Then we test whether the green peak breathes with the roll packet or with our own steps. If the periodicity survives those knives, we store every frame within 47 seconds and tag the set for independent processing in 3 pipelines. We spin a quick model to check whether a thin film coating could make that color at that angle. If the model sings, it narrows the field to materials science. If the model coughs, it widens the field to intent. Throughout, I keep my voice clean, so the numbers stand alone. The countdown refuses drama. It asks only for accuracy. If the light is modulated, someone may be telling a time we have not learned to read. We do not begin with math. We begin with a word we can carry across a room. In the quiet after the window drill, I say it on channel so no one can pretend they did not hear. We will call it Third Interstellar/Atlas, spoken exactly like that. The first time only. Also say 3I/Atlas, so no one mistakes the letter for the number. A name snaps the team into a shared picture. A name lets a logbook breathe. You can point at a name. You can walk a name from one console to the next without smudging the math behind it. A name turns fear into tasks and turns wonder into timing marks. We make it plain because plain words are stable under pressure. I taste the syllables once more and exact, then pin them to the channel. Naming is our first measurement. We did not call the first wanderer a messenger. We called it Oumuamua, and in that sound the press heard a visitor and a riddle, while the math whispered a puzzle. The second wanderer, Borisov, arrived like a comet that remembered how to be a comet. Their paths wrote thin lines past our sun and away, no waiting, no circling. Third Interstellar/Atlas is not a repeat. Its vector leans toward Mars and leaning, as if the red planet were a waypoint, not a hazard. Its brightness refuses to behave where the magnetotail should swallow light. The curve does not sag when models say it must. We have seen stubborn before, but not with this geometry. A name frames expectation. Say wanderer and you forgive strangeness. Say probe and you hunt patterns. Say debris and you look past it. In naming, we choose which questions earn oxygen first. What answers have we invited by the word we chose? Atlas is a project on Earth, not a person in the sky. The letters come from an Earth-based survey that catches sudden light with quick alarms. We owe that network credit for the first whisper, but the object does not belong to the name as a child belongs to a parent. It is only a handle on a hot kettle, useful, not edible. Still, coincidence is a magnet for stories. Say Atlas and someone imagines a giant with a world on his shoulder and then imports strength, endurance, and burden into the data. say Atlas, and another mind hears a map of everything and smuggles certainty into a place that should be doubt. I say the name with care so those stowaways cannot climb aboard. The name helps us move together. It must not tell us what to think. What we call a stranger changes the stranger in our heads. Say Scout and the heart opens. Say Probe and the jaw tightens. Say Relic and hope leans toward fossils. Say Weapon and the lights turn colder. We write these words on our tongues before we know it. Rhea hears Scout and sharpens geometry. KG hears Probe and checks keep out zones twice. Sahana hears Relic and sets her hand on the brake of wishful thinking. I hear all of it and try to keep the channel clean. A name is a steering wheel that looks like a sticker. It seems harmless. It moves everything. If we call it a guest, we become hosts and shape the room around hospitality. If we call it a test, we tense and invent threats. Words tug the instrument rack before numbers do. The numbers that walked us to the working name were simple and sharp. A green reflectance that sat near 530 nanometers and refused to drown where it should drown. A difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration that stayed positive, enough to move a door already open. A roll with a period of 19.7 seconds and a swing of 2 degrees that arrived in packets of 5 cycles. Alone, each clue could be noise. Together, they pulled the story toward a will. Rhea mapped how the roll might keep a sensor aimed through the plume without crossing the limb. KG modeled how a tiny push delivered just right could spare mass while cutting risk. Sahana wrote 2 columns, one titled Material and one titled Intent, and made us earn every line we placed. I said the numbers flat so the team could hear meaning without hearing my wishes. The shape of the evidence was starting to look like a hand. Each pattern echoed a night already logged. There is a ritual for names that reach beyond one team. The International Astronomical Union uses a ladder. First a temporary tag that folds in the year and a code, like a coat check ticket. Then a round of orbit work to prove the path is not a ghost. Then a vote that lifts the collar tag into a name the field embraces. Working names live in the crack between discovery and decree. They move gear and minds while the ink dries elsewhere. Sometimes the working name stays, sometimes it sheds like a skin once the official label arrives. We accept that, for now. We also refuse to wait for permission to coordinate. On Phobos Beta, Third Interstellar/Atlas is a handle everyone can grasp without confusion, an anchor for logs, and a flag for our shared folder. If the final name changes later, our records will follow. The night will not rewrite itself to match a later ceremony. When we speak outside the room, we slow down on purpose. We say 5 minutes before the window opens instead of T-5, because plain speech resists distortion. We say signal-to-noise ratio, not letters with 3 meanings. We speak degrees and meters per second squared as if numbers were objects you could hold. We spell the time as universal time, and we keep the date in year, month, day order to avoid confusion across borders. We explain what the error bars mean and what they do not mean. We list what we do not know next to what we do. We never promise why when we can measure how. We do not offer villains to feed headlines. We offer method, context, and limits. Clarity is not drama, yet it keeps listeners from falling off the story. So we keep the name and we doubt the name. We keep it because teams need handholds, and we doubt because handholds can harden into handcuffs. The name pins our papers, clears our channels, and lets us call history by something other than a serial number. But the object is not the syllables that reach it. A map is not a mountain. A call sign is not a person. I repeat this to myself while Mars burns along the horizon and the station hums behind my spine. We will call it Third Interstellar/Atlas, and we will speak it clearly, and we will test it mercilessly. If the data forces a new banner, we will move without regret. A name is a compass, not a verdict, and a compass only helps if you keep walking. Forward together now. I did not expect Mars to hide anything for me. I expected a red world, a hard horizon, and numbers that fit into their boxes. The magnetotail changed that. Behind the planet, night stretches like a long, cold river of charged dust and sputtered ions, pulled away by the solar wind and stiffened by crustal magnets frozen in Martian rock. This is not a global shield like Earth owns. It is a ragged cloak, stitched from patches of magnetized stone and a thin atmosphere. The cloak can both hide and reveal. Step behind it, and your light dims in a way that fools simple models. The air is thin. If I were designing a test for subtle sensors, I would choose a place like this. Bright planet in front, darkness behind, and a veil that turns error bars into living things. If someone wanted to measure something faint, they would hide behind a world. From Phobos, the geometry is a clean line sketched with my hands, one palm for the planet and a second for the tail. The object will skim the plume at a grazing angle that keeps the bright limb of Mars outside the spectrometer slit. The altitude is 6,000 kilometers above the surface. The phase angle is 35 degrees and will drift during the pass. The mount must keep the slit just off the limb so the planet does not blind the glass. We get a corridor, not a field. The corridor is drawn by 3 motions at once. The object moving past, Phobos turning under my boots, and the tail flowing like a slow river. We stand where those motions line up into a narrow yes. Miss it, and the mathematics will spit out consolation, not data. Tonight, I keep 2 maps in my head, aerogravity and instinct. Instinct says take the easy curve and treat Mars as a waypoint, the way a Hohmann transfer treats 2 orbits as polite neighbors. Aerogravity says something bolder. Dip near the atmosphere, borrow a touch of drag, lean on gravity, and trade a small change in direction for a large payoff later. Come too low and heat turns you into a story. Stay too high and the drag never bites. A natural rock could blunder into such a path, but the corridor we watch is not generous. It runs through noise and near the limb, a place a traveler rarely chooses. If the object is using Mars as a tuning fork to retune its vector, this is where you listen for the note. Small corrections here echo loudly out there. The tail is a busy room. Plasma curls, dust grains pick up charge, and all of it can play tricks on sensors. Charged grains can ping the photometer with tiny spikes that masquerade as brightness. The plume can shift the baseline of a spectrum so that honest colors look wrong. Radar phase can bend in ways that suggest false velocities and false accelerations. We prepare for the worst in simple ways. Keep exposure time short, so smear never outruns signal. Keep the spectrometer slit angled away from the limb by a safe hair. Require a minimum signal-to-noise ratio of 10 before we bless a feature. Keep the radar in listen, ready to pulse if reflectance fades below 1%. Space is patient, sensors are not. Our patients must cover their nerves. Plain steps beat clever guesses every time. 47 seconds is a hallway with 3 doors and no time to admire the paint. It comes from the relative motion of the object, the spin of Phobos, and the carved safe region where our slit can look without being burned by glare. The corridor opens because the tail bows enough to give us a line past the limb. The corridor closes because the line moves on, and because Phobos moves too, dragging our station through an arc that tightens or loosens the view by the second. We can cheat a little by shaving exposure lengths and by biasing the pointing just a whisper away from the limb, but every shave and whisper costs us signal. The hallway gives us 47 seconds, not more. Precision is not a luxury here, it is the price of admission. Tonight, you can draw our problem with words and be faithful. Picture the sun at your left hand, bright and loud. Picture Mars in the middle like a coin held up against that loudness. The tail trails away to your right like a veil across black. Put our station above the coin's rim, just off the bright edge where the veil begins. Now sketch the path of third interstellar/Atlas as a faint line sliding under the veil and out again, always a whisper from the rim but never crossing it. Tilt the spectrometer slit degrees away so the planet's glare cannot pour down the throat. Keep a radar beam in reserve. Hold a photometer to watch the sky glow. With words you can see the diagram and feel the posture our station must hold to keep the measurement clean. The picture is enough. Because the corridor is narrow, we speak a decision tree aloud and let it guide our hands. If the signal-to-noise ratio falls below 8 for 10 seconds, we pause the spectrum collection and lean on the radar until the basin steadies. If reflectance slides under 1%, we promote the radar to primary, shorten the photometer cadence, and emphasize acceleration over color. If we see a roll near 19.7 seconds with a swing near 2 degrees, we lock the axis and commit to recording everything until the corridor closes. If the limb brightens the slit beyond our safe line, we step away and live to try again. Every branch ends with a clear sentence that a sleepy mind can obey. The tale loves confusion. We counter with plain speech. Simple words are our best shielding. What could anything want in a place like this? The generous answer is physics. The tale is a lab bench for plasma behavior far from a clean chamber. If you wanted to calibrate a sensor built to sniff at weak emissions, you might choose a place where thin air is shaped by a planet and stretched into lace. The curious answer is geology by proxy. The grazing geometry makes for unique glints and shadows on dust and rock that a straight sunlight pass would never show. The dark answer is rehearsal. If you wanted to measure human response without starting a panic, you would do it in a narrow corridor that demands discipline near a planet we love. Physics, geology, rehearsal. Each path has tests. Each test waits on the other side of this hallway. It requires close attention. Now, all of this sounds tidy when written in a calm room. In the room we live in, it is not tidy. It is a balance of patience and nerve. The tale can make honest data look like a trick, and tricks look like discovery. So we keep our vocabulary simple. We say what the sensor saw and what the model predicts, and we do not jump the gap between them without a bridge we can audit. We say 5 minutes before the window opens instead of a code that hides meaning. We say degrees and meters per second squared and nanometers. We list what we do not know next to what we do. We choose boredom over bravado when boredom protects the data. Plain talk keeps the room honest and the record clear. Clarity is the only drama we can afford tonight. In the end, the magneto tale is both mask and mirror. It hides the object inside its bruise-colored folds and reveals the limits of our own seeing. It forces us to move in a straight line, and the straight line forces us to be honest. A whisper of drag far from home can warp a path that crosses civilizations. A degree of roll can decide whether light lives or dies inside a slit. A second added or lost can erase an entire night of work. I stand with Mars ahead and feel the hallway breathe around me. The problem is not the planet. The problem is the tale that turns precision into a moral choice. We will make the choice, one clean sentence at a time. The rest will be numbers, and numbers, if we are lucky, will be kind. Before the window opens, we recite our shift vow out loud. One sentence, one idea. No drama, no swagger, no shortcuts. I hold the sensors and the clock. If I miss one beat, the door closes. I align breath to the checklist and let pride sit outside the room. Data before ego, clarity before speed. We say numbers the same way every time so no mind can twist them. We speak slowly, even when fear wants us fast. If I say the wrong word at the wrong time, the night will not forgive it. I accept price of precision. Rhea Lowell keeps the geometry, and the geometry keeps us alive. She plans paths the way a watchmaker files teeth. Thin, exact, unsentimental. Transfer arcs and limb angles tattoo her notebooks like star maps. With her hands resting lightly on the joystick, she does not chase the object, she builds the corridor for it to walk through. The spectrometer slit will skim the limb without drinking glare, because Rhea refuses to accept luck as a method. When models drift by a hair, her silence deepens until the fix arrives. She annotates every turn with plain reasons, not charms. She trusts small corrections made early, because small corrections here echo loudly later. Rhea does not guess, Rhea proves. When she says hold 2 degrees off the limb, I do not argue. I move my fingers before I think of style. Keiji Morita owns the borders around our curiosity. He served on impact prediction teams where every comma could bend a city. Panic walked those halls. Keiji taught it to sit. He turns fear into lists and lists into habits. His board shows keep out zones, abort boxes, and safe pointing margins like fences in a dark field. His motto is blunt: limits before questions, safety before wonder. As during drills, he walks the room with a tape measure eye, moving cables and cups as if they were meteors. When a window opens, he becomes a thermostat for temperature. He lowers drama and raises focus. If the limb brightens beyond safe line, he pulls us back. If reflectance drops below 1%, he promotes radar and trims exposure. KG believes courage is obedience to limits, practiced until it feels like instinct. Sahana Ortiz fights the soft pull of easy hope. Astrobiology can make poets out of patient people, and she refuses that trade. She learned her caution in deserts where rock pretends to be life with exquisite skill. In our room, she draws 2 columns on a board, material on the left, intent on the right. Every claim must step into one or wait outside. A green peak near 530 nanometers starts in material until a coupled pattern drags it toward intent. She bans metaphors in the log. She loves definitions like handrails. When I say breathing curve, she raises an eyebrow until I replace the image with a measurement. Her phrase for glory is later. Sahana's gift is to make stubborn awe earn its keep. When the story wants a hero, she makes the checklist the protagonist. I keep my voice flat enough to level glass. Flat does not mean dull, it means honest. I say signal to noise ratio, not letters that can lie. I say meters per second squared, degrees, and universal time, as if they were stones in a river you can step across without slipping. I repeat a number once, leave it alone. When data leans toward meaning, I hand the meaning to Sahana. When geometry opens like a door, I hand thanks to Ria. When limits bite, KG gets the word. I police my verbs like valves. If a sentence carries a guess, I mark it as a guess. My tone must be a level surface where the data can stand. Our handover ritual looks simple until the clock eats seconds. I say frame to mark a capture. Ria says track to anchor geometry. KG says clear to certify safety. Sahana says log to pin the record to the wall. One word, one switch, no ornament. If any word misfires or overlaps, we stop and repeat the chain. Confirmations use keywords, not cleverness, because repetition holds when stress erases style. Between those words, we let silence do work. The corridor is narrow, chatter widens nothing. We practice with tongue twisters and tired eyes until the cadence survives boredom and fear. When the corridor opens, the ritual opens with it, and our 4 voices become a clean instrument, not a crowd. The tools look plain on paper and ruthless in practice. Our visible and near-infrared spectrometer covers 400 to 1000 nanometers and demands focus, like a surgeon demands clean steel. The radar in the X-band speaks at 9.6 GHz and listens harder than it speaks. The 4-channel photometer watches sky glow with a stare. We set railings, record when the signal-to-noise ratio holds above 10 or when it spikes above 12. Promote radar if reflectance slides below 1%. Flag delta A, the difference in acceleration, when it exceeds 0.0005 meters per second squared. Rails look strict until the night suddenly leans on them. They feel kind. Trust on a night shift is not a blanket. It is a weave that can snag. Ria distrusts leaps. KG distrusts swagger that calls itself bravery. Sahana distrusts headlines born before data can crawl. I distrust any sentence that hides its verb. Frictions do not vanish with time, they learn manners. We manage them with rules that pick winners. The person closest to a limit makes the call, the rest back the call. We record disagreements in a log large enough for every voice, then ask the run of numbers to embarrass us into improvement. Tonight, trust must beat instinct. If trust wins, we leave with clean data. If instinct wins, we leave with stories that will not hold. First light is not a sunrise, it is a screen that stops being empty. I start the capture chain and let my breath match the metronome of the mount. Exposure time is 1.0 seconds, cadence is 2 seconds. The slit is parked just off the limb so the planet will not pour glare into the throat of the spectrometer. The window is a corridor of 47 seconds, narrow as a blade. I say the settings out loud so the room can hear them, and so I can hear myself being the same person who rehearsed this. My hands rest where practice put them. My voice stays flat. Hooks are for the mind. The instrument only wants clarity. Light arrives, thin and stubborn. My doubt arrives faster. I welcome both and keep them apart. I confirm photometer gain, radar standby, and focus lock. Powder rattles the truss. I ignore the tremor and trust the bolts. We begin now. Time stamp the frame with universal time. Anchor it to pointing coordinates, slit temperature, and the posture of the mount. Confirm clocks synchronized within 1 millisecond. Note Phobos' position in its arc and Mars in its shadowed geometry. Record motor currents, reaction wheel speed, and the vibration floor under my boots. Each line lands in a custody chain that begins with my voice and will pass through hands I trust and hands I will never meet. I label every file with the corridor tag and the exact second. I sign the log with a sentence that says what I did and why I did it. House in order. Locks in place. The first frame is sealed and ready for audit. Quality gates are spoken like vows. We will record any feature whose signal-to-noise ratio remains at 10 or above on 2 consecutive frames. We will record without debate if the ratio spikes above 12 on a single frame. Our attention sits near 530 nanometers, where a green band has refused to drown in the tail. If the ratio drifts down toward 8, I hold my breath, steady the slit, and let motion blur, starve. No hunting, no heroics, just clean cadence and disciplined exposure. The photometer watches sky glow, the spectrometer mines color, the radar waits like a spare lung. I speak the thresholds again in the same plain words so future me cannot pretend I meant something else. Signal-to-noise ratio is not a charm, it is a gate. It opens or it closes, we obey its hinge. The rule exists to protect meaning. Tonight, the acceleration panel insists on being interesting when I would prefer boring. Predicted acceleration from drag and gravity is 0.0005 meters per second squared. Measured acceleration is 0.0012 meters per second squared. Delta A, the difference in acceleration, is 0.0007 meters per second squared. Positive. Small, silly, and persistent. I rerun the fit and the number keeps its shape. 3 families of explanation step forward. First, plume physics that my model sands into something too smooth. Second, a micro thrust with no heat or halo, a trim push on a nearly right path. Third, calibration drift that wears a mask I failed to recognize. We test all 3. If it is plume, the number will wobble with geometry changes. If it is drift, the number will bow to an offset correction. If it is thrust, it will look like a fingertip against a door ajar. The shape is quiet and deliberate, and quiet means intent. The role declares itself when I stop telling the room what I want and begin listening. 19.7 seconds, 2 degrees peak to peak. It comes in a tidy packet of 5 cycles. Then the line goes flat, as if a hand had stilled a toy. I count a second packet and a third. The packets rhyme. Flat returns like a rest between phrases. The pattern is messy for tumbling rock and disciplined for debris. I picture a gimbal breathing, a sensor tasting the tail without drinking glare. I test the temptation to call it a schedule by trying to break it. I vary exposure length within the limit of the corridor. The packet does not care. I let the mount breathe and then bring it back onto the same line. The packet returns on time. I run an autocorrelation on the console and the peak lands where my ear thought it would. A habit lives here. I lean into the radar channel without speaking. Center frequency is 9.6 GHz. Receiver noise is calm. The phase reference is locked. I keep the transmitter quiet and listen for the phase to nod in time with the roll packets. If the phase and the roll agree, and if the reflectance moves with them, then 3 lines will sing together. Light, motion, echo. When 3 lines sing, noise runs out of costumes. If only one sings and the rest shrug, I will name it a ghost and let it drift without a headline. I track the suspected specular patch with a narrow window and let the echo breathe. The phase wobbles a little, then steadies, then nods again on the 5th beat. I mark the time, the angle, and the doubt. If 3 voices hum, intention may be clearing its throat. The room stays respectful of silence. Null tests are the knives we use to pare away lies. I change the exposure time in a sequence of prime numbers so any shutter rhythm falls out of step. I rotate the slit a measured hair farther from the limb to see whether the green peak can live without help. I swap channel order and invert the cadence. I unship a control I mistrust and watch whether the data follows. Glare stays under 1%. Hot pixels are 0. Crosstalk sits below -60 decibels. I give the system 12 seconds to run its standard routine of anchoring stars, normalizing black level, and subtracting background. Then I run it again to make my laziness blush. Only after the signal survives those knives do I whisper the word real to myself. Even then, I do not let the whisper onto the channel. The test does not promise truth. It only removes a few elegant lies. Survival under knives is not proof, but it is a start, for now. Now I audit the soft machinery that lives behind my eyes. I write each hypothesis as a conditional sentence that a single counterexample can break. If the green band modulation repeats at a fixed period independent of exposure length, then it is not a shutter artifact. If the radar phase shifts in lockstep with the roll packets, then motion and reflectance are coupled. If delta A stays positive through a slit adjustment and through a plume crossing, then calibration error is unlikely. I hand the sentences to Ria for geometry and to KG for limits and to Sahana for meaning. They reply with knives and I thank them in the same breath. We keep a stop rule that says we pause if the signal-to-noise ratio falls below 8 for 10 seconds. We keep a mirror rule that says we tag confidence only after an independent path agrees. Data ethics are habits you can hear in a room. Frames become a stack with a spine. I package the run as dataset 0 with a time range, a full record of settings, and a diary of every adjustment. I attach tremor traces from the truss because vibration can smudge pixels. I attach mount currents because a tired motor can lie. I attach slit temperature because warmth can sneak focus away. Then I write the 3 things we do not know. We do not know whether a thin film on the surface could make this green at this angle. We do not know the source of any micro thrust that would leave no plume and still shape a path. We do not know what the cadence means, if it means anything beyond survival in a noisy veil. I pin the questions to the front page so we do not forget them when a headline knocks. Tonight the evidence spoke before belief, and we honored it. We ask again tomorrow. I will tell you what I saw tonight, and I will tell you what I refuse to believe. I do not press send. I type the line, watch the cursor blink, and leave the message in drafts. The crew deserves clear thinking, not my pulse in their heads. The public deserves numbers, not heat. If I write to feel lighter, the data grows heavier. If I reach for comfort, I will smuggle comfort into the console. When the observation window closes, I need a mirror that shows what I did. This draft is that mirror. I am writing, so I cannot claim fog over clarity. Relief is not a measurement, and I will not confuse the two. You are the one person who will understand the cadence of a night like this. Years ago you sat with me in a basement lab while an old detector learned to hold its own temperature. You listened to the room and said, "Machines have heartbeats if you are quiet enough to hear them." You are not on this crew now, but the habits we built at that table keep me steady. When I say one sentence, one idea, I am reciting one of yours. When I say what moves the needle, I am quoting you through muscle. You taught me to count before I believe. You once said patience is a form of courage, and I believe you. Here are the forces that tug at me, and here is how I pull back. I want the story with a pilot because the role sings like a schedule, so I speak numbers flat and hand the urge to Sahana. I want a win because I fear failing in front of people I respect, so I ask KG for limits that can end a run, and I obey them like gravity. I want to confirm what I suspect because confirmation feels like safety, so I invoke null tests before I allow myself words like pattern or signal. I want to dramatize to keep listeners awake, so I choose dull purposefully when dull protects the record. 4 biases, 4 counterweights, pilot dream versus flat tone, pride versus rules, confirmation versus knives, drama versus patience. Hope is welcome. Proof goes first. Let me rewrite the night in plain speech, because plain speech keeps me from drifting. 5 minutes before the observation window opens, we check every system and make our vows out loud. We say signal to noise ratio, not letters. We say meters per second squared, not symbols. We say universal time and spell the numbers with a human mouth. We set the spectrometer exposure to 1.0 seconds and the cadence to 2 seconds. We park the slit just off the limb so the planet will not pour glare down the throat. We keep the photometer watching sky glow and hold the radar in quiet listen. When light arrives, we record only what stands above the gates we agreed upon. We speak in sentences with one idea each. The plainer the words, the straighter the path truth walks. Three numbers are the bones of the night, and I am sure of them. First, the green reflectance near 530 nanometers, held at 2.1% when models demanded less. Second, the difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration sat at 0.0007 meters per second squared, positive. Third, the roll period repeated at 19.7 seconds with a swing of about 2 degrees, arriving in packets of 5 cycles before resting. Each number survived knives meant to slice away illusions. Each number remained after we varied exposure, rotated the slit, and shifted cadence. If these three are wrong, it will be because tomorrow is stronger, not because tonight was still careless. What I do not know is larger than what I know, and I will honor that. I do not know whether a thin film or a textured surface could explain the green peak at that angle without intent. I do not know the source of any microthrust strong enough to nudge a path while leaving no plume. I do not know why the roll arrives in 5 cycle packets, or whether the packets are a language or a survival trick. We have tests. We will push geometry to change angles and watch whether the peak obeys. We will hunt thermal ghosts. We will bracket the roll with knives. Not knowing today is a down payment on knowing tomorrow. Here is the oath I make to you, and through you to anyone who trusted the work. I will not say why, while I have only measured how. I will not promise a headline to buy rest. I will place a caution beside every conclusion until an independent path removes it. I will choose transparency over speed when they collide. I will write sentences a tired reader can truly audit. If someone asks me to turn up the heat to sell the story, I will decline. If praise arrives for certainty, I will ask for doubt. If I must choose between being first and being clear, I will be clear. Ethics is tempo, and tonight the tempo is exact. You told me drafting is a way of listening, and I hear myself now. I hear the parts I like and the parts I must not trust. This message stays in drafts as a black box for my mind. If the run goes badly tomorrow, I will open it and compare feeling with action. If the run goes well, I will open it and look where pride tried to steer. I did not find proof tonight. I found a corridor and kept it. I found 3 numbers that stand when pushed and a team with steady hands. I will not send this to buy sympathy. I will lock this draft as I would lock evidence. Belief will be earned. Aerogravity retune is a plain phrase for a precise act. It means changing a path through space by grazing a thin atmosphere while leaning on gravity at the same time. You spend almost no propellant and still bend your future. It is a fingertip on a spinning coin. For third interstellar/Atlas, the fingertip would rest against the veil behind Mars, where night and thin air complicate every easy rule. The aim is not to burn, the aim is to let almost nothing do everything. I say it as a promise to myself, adjust a hair now, win a voyage later. A feather can steer a ship when the feather meets the helm. The tail behind Mars is the right workbench for such careful craft. Darkness lowers glare and forces honesty about brightness. The plume of ions and charged dust misbehaves, which is a gift when you need to test a sensor that claims it can hear whispers. The line of sight near the bright rim of the planet makes geometry act like a lever. A whispered force, timed and aimed, looks large to an observer who must keep the slit just off the limb. We have 47 seconds because the tail and our mount and the object agree only briefly on a corridor. The corridor is narrow, and it is honest. If someone needs a small nudge that becomes a decision, this is where to push. The mechanism is a duet. Drag sings the quiet part. Gravity sings the melody. You dip just close enough that the thinnest air rubs a face and takes a trace of energy away. At the same time, the planet bends the path as if the object were a bead on a wire. The sum is a slingshot that does not scorch the shell and does not waste mass. It depends on 4 levers I can name without symbols. First is the altitude of closest approach, which for us sits near 6,000 kilometers above the surface. Second is the entry angle, because a shallow kiss is different from a bite. Third is the area the thin air can touch, set by shape and posture. Fourth is how the surface treats light and heat. Albedo and emissivity stated as traits, not Greek. Change any lever and the duet sounds different. The roll we measured may be the way that care stays alive. A period of 19.7 seconds, a swing of about 2 degrees from side to side, and a habit of arriving in packets of 5 cycles before resting. That sweet could be the schedule of a sensor trying to keep its gaze clear of the bright limb while tasting the tail. Hold the facet to the flow, then relax, then hold again. The packets might match the time it takes to update a control law. They might also be a way to gate sampling so that the record keeps pace with the corridor. We cannot know motive yet, but we can predict outcomes if the motive is tuning. If the roll is steering drag and glare, its footprints should show up in 3 places at once. If hypothesis 1 is right, our notebooks should fill with certain shapes. First, the difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration should stay positive within the corridor, not a spike, but a shelf. Second, the reflectance near 530 nanometers should rise and fall in step with the roll packets, as if a face were turning a coated patch through our gaze. Third, the radar phase should nod on the same beat that the roll and the reflectance move, braiding 3 lines. Fourth, there should be no thermal plume at the level our instruments can see, which keeps microthrust as a separate story. Fifth, the light curve should reject the neat equation of a rigid body tumbling freely and instead prefer the rhythm of guidance. Each shape is a test we can pass or fail in one night. I write an envelope of numbers so the team can aim. Closest approach should live near 6,000 kilometers above the surface in this pass. The difference in acceleration that caught our eyes holds around 0.0007 meters per second squared, a small thing that keeps its posture. The impulse you could build during 47 seconds at that level is about 0.03 meters per second, enough to matter later if you pay attention to direction now. The roll amplitude lives near 2 degrees peak to peak. The period lives at 19.7 seconds. The packets prefer groups of 5. Our target signal-to-noise ratio is 10 or higher for comfort, and 12 if the corridor decides to bless us. We will take them down if they fail to stand. I turn the dials in my head for 3 levels of drag. In the low case, the air is too thin or the skin too shy, and the difference in acceleration clings near 0. The phase will shrug, the roll will read like a habit without effect, and the geometry will feel wasted. In the nominal case, the numbers we have already seen repeat: small positive acceleration, packets of 5 cycles, a green band that breathes in time, and no heat to give the game away. In the high case, the air bites too hard. The shell will warm and a thermal bloom will color the spectrum. The green peak will wander or wash out. Those 3 sketches will let us sort nature from intention without guessing. There are imposters that love to wear this costume. A tiny vent could leak from a fracture and push the path without a plume, a microthruster made of a bad weld. A thermal glint could pretend to be color, rising and falling when the line of sight grazes a warm patch. A calibration drift could creep so politely that it fits our hope like a glove. The plume itself can bend radar phase in ways that sing harmony where there is none and can stun a spectrometer into seeing its own lamp. We hold knives for each. We will move geometry to ask whether the shelf of acceleration tracks point of view. We will chase the glint across angles until it gives up its trick. We will align and realign our standards until drift is ashamed to show its face. We will use prime number exposure steps to saw through shutter rhythms. Only what survives those knives earns the word real on our channel. So here is what Hypothesis 1 says the object wants at Mars if it proves out. It wants to change direction without advertising the change. It wants to calibrate a sensor by tasting the hardest soup within reach. It wants to save energy by letting almost nothing do almost everything. That is not romance. That is craft. It means we are not the audience, though we are near the stage. It means the planet is a tool in a kit, not a shrine. It means we should see pairs of runs that mirror one another as the path is retuned in steps rather than a single swing. If we are watching a sailor, then Mars is the current, the tail is the eddy line, and the roll is the paddle feathering the stroke. I look down our plan for tomorrow and smile because it reads like a list of traps for our own wishes. We will push the slit a hair farther from the limb and see whether the positive shelf of acceleration holds. We will alter exposure length in a way that keeps the signal-to-noise ratio honest and proves the green breath is not a shutter drum. We will pull the radar into a tighter lock on the specular spot and ask the phase to keep time with the roll or admit it was faking. We will watch the roll packets for a change in cadence when geometry shifts, because guidance should adapt and habit should not. We will repeat the corridor if the sky gives it back to us, because repetition is the only applause data respects. When the night is over, we will ask the record to tell us whether the feather moved the helm or whether we mistook a ripple for a hand. I register predictions before we touch controls. A hypothesis earns air after it survives knives. We write the null first. If signals do not couple, the shape is noise, and the story must fold. The gate for a feature is a signal-to-noise ratio of 10 on 2 frames or a spike above 12. Our stop rule says we pause if the ratio drops below 8 for 10 seconds. We log these vows in the record so future us cannot cheat, and so fatigue cannot edit truth. Discipline is the rope we climb when the night grows steep. First comes geometry. I rotate the spectrometer slit a measured hair farther from the limb and nudge the line of sight to a safer angle. If the difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration switches sign or collapses as the angle changes, the tail is playing tricks and the shelf was never a shelf. If the shelf stands independent of pointing, the push is not a limb ghost. I keep my voice flat while the room listens for the echo of a lie. We want a ship. We hunt a reflection. The corridor rewards honesty and punishes hope tonight, hard. Second comes cadence versus green. I change exposure time through a short ladder of prime numbers and keep cadence steady so shutter rhythm cannot hum in sympathy. If the reflectance peak near 530 nanometers keeps time regardless of exposure, it rises from the board and takes a seat among the real. If it slurs to match any cadence we own, it returns to the cupboard of artifacts. I call the numbers. Sahana calls the meaning. A true signal keeps its beat when our metronome stumbles, and it keeps breathing when we hold our breath under stress too. Third comes radar phase against roll. I keep the transmitter quiet and listen at 9.6 GHz for the phase to nod in step with the roll packets. We measured 19.7 seconds and about 2 degrees peak to peak. If the echo nods when the roll breathes, light and motion braid into a rope. If it drifts away, the rope frays and the claim loses weight. I note the beat count where any agreement appears, then shift geometry by a whisper and again. Only couples that survive a change in view deserve to be called bonded here. Fourth comes heat and breath. KG secures a partner channel in the thermal infrared where possible, or else we set upper limits using spectrum and photometer alone. If a warm bloom grows and fades with the roll, then microthrust or venting hides in plain sight and our idea falls. If heat stays quiet and the shelf of acceleration still stands, then any push must be subtle and cold. We also watch for asymmetric outgassing that would smear light or shift color. A plume is a shout. Our numbers have only whispered so far. Silence counts louder than bright noise. Fifth comes the light curve versus a free body. RIA builds a rigid shape model, normalizes it to our geometry, and lets it compete in public view. If the measured curve hugs that family, then the roll is habit, not posture, and we demote our claim. If the curve prefers guidance, with rests between packets and careful timing against glare, we keep the file open. Modesty demands we try very hard to prove ourselves ordinary before we call anything strange, even when hope runs hot. A good skeptic fights for normal first, then earns the right to speak surprise. Sixth comes the envelope for drag and gravity. We draft curves for closest approach near 6,000 kilometers above the surface and compare measured shelves against those lines. If intent drives the push, the positive shelf must live through small turns and minor shifts in view. If the number bobs with sightline, the culprit is the tail, not a hand on a helm. We run the sums twice with different assumptions about cross-section and surface finish. If both say the shelf should vanish and yet it remains, we sharpen pencils and push harder. Stubborn numbers deserve our strict attention. Seventh comes independent repetition. One corridor is not a sermon, it is a hint. We ask for another pass with similar geometry and route the data through 3 independent pipelines. The teams receive files without the words Hypothesis 1 attached. They work blind to intent and deaf to our favorite hooks. Only when at least 2 paths report the same couplings do we allow a sentence with spine. If the second corridor refuses to sing, we retire the aria from the program. Repetition is the currency of truth in this cold room. We spend it slowly and count change carefully. Eighth comes the rule for defeat. written now so we cannot move the posts later. Hypothesis 1 is dead if 2 of 3 couplings fail to appear. Roll with radar phase, roll with the green peak, and a stable positive shelf in acceleration. It is dead if thermal or venting signatures rise above our limits. It is dead if the light curve hugs the free body model across the corridor. It is dead if geometry alone can conjure or banish the shelf. We will phrase results so strangers can audit them, and we will release raw frames to earn trust. I state the premise in plain words because plain words keep us honest. Subsurface volatiles are water ice, carbon dioxide ice, briny water, or trapped gases beneath dust and stone. Recon means choosing a patch, gliding over it, and measuring again until a pattern holds. If Third Interstellar/Atlas is surveying volatiles, it might want fuel, it might want thermal control, it might want shielding from radiation, or it might want the story that old water tells. Water becomes hydrogen and oxygen when given energy, and those become movement when fed to an engine. Old water remembers geology and biology. In this hypothesis, the object is not merely passing by. It is studying, mapping, and ranking places where thin frost hides and where smooth patches whisper of ice below. I will not promise purpose. I will describe behavior and location and repetition, and let purpose wait its turn, patiently. Mars and its 2 small moons offer a map that tempts careful scouts. Gravity is soft, escape energy is modest, and the price of up and down is kinder than near Earth. Ice may linger at mid-latitudes and at the poles under blankets of dust. The tiny moons carry cold traps where shade does not end. Jezero Delta keeps rumors of an ancient lake. Arcadia, Planitia carries whispers of buried layers. Elysium Planitia stretches flat as if it were ready to host equipment. Medusae Fossae lights arguments about ash and ice shaped by wind. The polar rims on Phobos and Deimos stay chilled enough to collect frost. A traveler who wishes to avoid noise from Earth will work here, far from our radio traffic. The politics are calmer at Mars than at home, and the depths are shallower. Small gravity wells mean small costs for sample tests and for later use. Choose Mars, test quietly, and learn with care. A good hunt begins with tools that speak clearly. The visible and near-infrared spectrometer spans 400 to 1,000 nanometers and hears gentle shifts in slope and phase that thin frost causes. A film redirects light in ways that bend a curve like a wrist. The radar in the X-band speaks at 9.6 GHz and listens for specular echoes that favor smooth patches and betray the dielectric character of what lies near the surface. The 4-channel photometer watches sky glow and notes faint increases in scatter that ride along when frost appears. Together, they can point toward places where ice hides close to air. Our attention stays near 530 nanometers because a green surge keeps returning. If that surge survives our exposure games, it earns real weight. Specular radar tips that repeat while we tilt the view earn more. We can proceed without thermal infrared, though help would be welcome. With these 3, in this corridor, we can test the idea without over-promising. Mapping geometry must follow the corridor we have learned to respect. We hold the slit off the limb so glare does not flood the spectrometer. Our altitude sits 6,000 kilometers above the surface. Exposure time is 1.0 seconds, cadence is 2 seconds, the roll lives at 19.7 seconds and arrives in packets of 5 cycles. To mimic a hover, we hold the axis through a packet, let rest return, then hold another packet over the same patch. Across nights, we repeat the track so that strips become a grid. Each strip crosses a cell we label and index for return. We time passes so the tail is in the same posture, because the veil can move enough to mislead. Between packets we breathe, confirm pointing, and confirm focus. We log universal time, coordinates, slit temperature, mount currents, and the vibration floor. This is not a glamorous art. It is discipline practiced until it becomes skill. If this hypothesis is right, our records should fill with linked signals. First, the roll at 19.7 seconds should align with the edges of suspected frost fields, parking packets of 5 cycles where our maps show likely cold. It should repeat the parking act on later nights when geometry matches within a tolerance. Second, the green surge around 530 nanometers should return when the angle repeats, and it should ignore changes in exposure time. It should crest on the same beat that the roll breathes. Third, the radar phase should perform a small nod over strange smoothness and keep that nod when we tilt the view. It should favor patches that look like thin films or glazed skins laid by cold breath. Fourth, the light curve should reject the neat equations of a rigid free spin and prefer the rhythm of guidance with rests between packets and careful timing against glare. Fifth, the path on our map should bend back toward the richest cells rather than sweep evenly, as if a shopper were revisiting the best shelves. Taken together, those 5 would make recon more likely than accident and more likely than artless wandering. With care, we write tests with thresholds so hope cannot steer the pen. We accept features only when the signal-to-noise ratio is 10 or higher, and we elevate confidence when it crests at 12. We step exposure time in primes to kill shutter rhythm. We tilt the slit away from the limb to test whether geometry is the puppeteer. We require 2 independent channels to agree before we speak beyond the room. A spectrum may pair with radar, or a spectrum may pair with roll timing. Either way, independence matters, because a single channel can lie while a pair must work to lie in concert. Every claim enters a book that lists its conditions, its timestamps, and margins. We close each test with a sentence that a tired mind can repeat. This is really about procedure, and about the humility that preserves truth while excitement tries to climb aboard. Procedure matters when a surge rings the bell. First, we lock the axis without drama and hold the roll where it serves the slit. Then we capture every frame across the full 47 seconds. We keep the radar in listen so it can track phase cleanly, and we record the photometer output without blinking. Next, we walk the pointing by a small change to break the symmetry of luck. We build a tight grid around the coordinate, label each cell, and schedule a return pass that favors the richest boxes. We number the boxes on the map and tag them in the log so future crews can follow without squinting. At the end of the corridor, we snap a star field to catch any drift in focus or alignment. On the next night, we retrace the path at the same hour if the sky allows it. If the pattern repeats, we widen the grid. If the pattern fades, we record the retreat honestly and move on. Discipline beats hurry. Every hunt carries imposters. Fine dust can sparkle like frost when the angle is kind. Oxidized rock can paint a false green when iron toys with light. The limb can send glare that sneaks past caution and paints confidence where emptiness stands. The plume behind the planet can bend radar phase and hint harmony where only noise exists. Terrain slopes can turn reflection into a mirror for a beat. Each risk has a knife. Change the angle and see if the trick loses power. Change exposure time using prime steps and see if rhythm dies. Compare the scene with a terrain model and make sure geometry is not the puppeteer. Keep cross-talk below -60 decibels. Confirm that hot pixels are 0. Demand that a second channel agree when a surge claims to be real. Make the imposter work so hard and then see whether the signal still smiles. Why hunt volatiles at all? The first motive is fuel. Water turns into hydrogen and oxygen when you feed it energy, and those two become thrust when you feed them back into an engine. A traveler who makes fuel where they stop can travel farther. The second motive is shelter. Ice is a patient battery and a quiet wall. It soaks heat, slows swings, and blunts radiation. The third motive is history. Old water keeps the shapes of old life even when life is gone, and a careful mind might want that lesson before it chooses how to arrive, stay, or leave. Mars offers access with less drama than Earth. If someone plans to return, they will mark the wells first, and they will mark them with care. Wisely. If this hypothesis holds, signals must repeat, attach to coordinates, and ignore our exposure games. 2 independent channels must agree, while a third chooses not to protest. Then we will try to make the picture fall. If it does not fall, we widen the grid and invite hard eyes. Clarity remains our shield. Repetition remains our sword. We proceed carefully. I register the predictions before I touch any controls because a hypothesis must survive knives before it earns air. Signals must repeat, must stay attached to coordinates, and must ignore our exposure games. 2 independent channels must agree before we speak beyond the room. The gate is a signal to noise ratio of 10 on 2 frames, or a single spike above 12. The stop rule is simple. If the ratio drops below 8 for 10 seconds, we pause collection and stabilize. I write these vows into the record now, so later fatigue cannot move the posts later. Discipline carries truth uphill. Geometry comes first. I rotate the spectrometer slit a small, measured step farther from the limb and shift pointing by a careful whisker. If the green surge fades or vanishes with this small change, glare from the bright rim is the puppeteer. I also add a gentle roll offset to change the facet we present. If the radar phase nod weakens in the same breath, terrain slope may be serving us a mirror instead of water. If both signals remain when geometry shifts, then they are not limb tricks. Plain speech keeps our hands steady. Exposure independence is next. I step the exposure time through a short ladder of prime numbers, so any shutter rhythm loses its echo. I hold cadence steady so only the exposure length is moving. If the peak near 530 nanometers keeps its period and its height, the signal refuses to dance to our drum and earns trust. If the peak slides to match our timing, it belongs to the shutter and returns to the box of illusions. I say each step out loud, then let Sahana call the meaning. A true rhythm survives when we scramble our own. Radar must agree with light if frost is real. I keep the transmitter quiet and listen at 9.6 GHz, watching for a specular reflection that holds while we nudge the incidence angle by a small known amount. If the echo remains tight and the phase makes a small, steady nod, smoothness is likely and thin ice becomes plausible. If the echo collapses as soon as the view tilts, a slope on bare rock posed as our friend for a moment. I log angle, time, and roll packet index so later eyes can audit without guessing. The photometer watches scatter as a quiet ally. A thin film of frost can lift scatter by a small, honest fraction right when the green surge crests. I look for that rise within the same few seconds and at the same coordinates. If scatter moves with the surge while exposure changes do not alter the pair, I raise the weight on material and lower the weight on intent. If scatter refuses to care, I lower confidence in frost and seek other causes. The roll packet timing matters as well. A repeatable alignment earns points. The absence of alignment subtracts them. Imposters love this corridor, so I name them and cut them. Terrain slope can fold reflection back toward us for a beat. I compare with a slope map and adjust view to test it. Oxidized iron can fake a green cast. I examine the full spectrum for companions it cannot hide. The magneto tail plume can bend radar phase. I watch dependence on phase angle and local night. Crosstalk must remain below -60 decibels, and hot pixels must be 0 by test, not by faith. If a signal follows illumination instead of place, it is not frost, it is theater. Repetition and geotag decide what moves forward. I schedule a second pass over the same coordinate within a small, stated error box. If the signal does not return, or if it slides along the ground track like a mirage, then reconnaissance fails. If it returns with the same beat and the same posture, it earns a star on the grid and a promise to visit again. I label the cell, link the logs, and pin uncertainty beside confidence. Real maps are built from patience, not from single nights of luck. A stable echo is worth 10 bright flukes. We protect ourselves from love of our own story with blind analysis. The data flows through 3 independent pipelines. The files carry time, geometry, and instrument states, but not the words hypothesis 2. One team works spectra, one works radar, one works timing and light curves. Only when at least 2 independent paths report the same pattern do we allow ourselves a sentence with spine. We also post the pre-registered gates and stop rules beside the plots so later readers can check us openly. Independence is our vaccine against romance. Blindness is the dose. Defeat must be written now in cold ink. Hypothesis 2 falls if signals refuse to repeat at the same coordinates or if any claimed feature depends on exposure time. It falls if the green surge and the radar phase do not align with intolerance, and it falls if geometry alone can conjure or erase the effect. It also falls if crosstalk or hot pixels intrude beyond our limits. When we speak the outcome, we will use cautious, audit-friendly language. We will release raw frames, timestamps, and settings. Clarity is the clean end to a clean test. I use plain words for a sharp idea. An adversarial training run means a practice exercise designed to measure our responses without causing harm. The object acts less like a wanderer and more like an examiner with a clipboard made of silence. It watches how we notice, how we speak, and how we decide when time runs thin. Here at Mars, the corridor is 47 seconds wide. The altitude is about 6,000 kilometers above the surface. The roll breathes at 19.7 seconds with a swing near 2 degrees. Those details could be mere ornaments, or they could be the clock and the ruler the examiner carries. I keep my voice flat while I name them, because names steady hands. If someone is timing us, the only winning move is clarity. If the exercise is real, what exactly might it be measuring? I draw the list I would choose if I wanted to learn a crew by watching, not by touching. Time from an event to the first public statement, measured in minutes and in hours across agencies. Thresholds of belief, like the signal-to-noise ratio at which posture shifts from caution to confidence. Our reflex to activate the radar in the X band at 9.6 GHz when optical channels dim. Our ability to hold safety while pressure climbs, which includes our will to pause when a corridor dazzles and our will to resume when it returns. Our preference order when data and story pull in opposite directions. Each item is simple to observe and difficult to fake. Together they sketch a species more clearly than any slogan. I outline the signature of a soft opponent, one who wants a chart of behavior rather than trophies. The pattern would look like this in a log. Brief probes that raise questions but do not force alarms, then pauses long enough for us to debate, then repeats that aim for the same geometry. 5 cycle packets of roll placed directly over procedures we call critical, such as handovers or go and no-go gates. No active emissions, to avoid shouting in a quiet room. No thermal plume, to avoid the signature of thrust. A path that passes near but not through assets we are using, and that skirts published keep-out zones with grace. Measured annoyance, not harm. Measured pressure, not crisis. A soft opponent seeks to see us, not to win a duel. Passive electronic intelligence is a tidy craft when done with patience. Listening means sweeping across bands while avoiding the licensed lanes we publish. Someone careful would map our background noise with enough fidelity to name us without forcing us to speak. They would measure the cadence of command links between surface and orbit and between orbit and ground, then sample again after a nudge to see if tempo changes. They would watch how we interleave instruments and how we favor one channel when another grows uncertain. They might even test whether our voices change when we read numbers we like versus numbers we fear. All of that can be done without a single burst we could call a shout. It is the art of reading a room by listening to its breathing. A safe geometry favors a creed I will not break. Do no harm. If this is a practice run, the flight plan will avoid published keep-out zones by a margin we can verify. Distances to working satellites will stay conservative. The path will not cut through critical lines of sight we announce. The trajectory will keep our spectrometer at the edge of the limb, daring our nerves, yet will not flood the slit with glare. The altitude will linger around 6,000 kilometers, where thin air is a whisper but not a flame. The roll will trim glare with a modest 2 degrees peak to peak instead of sweeping bravado. A careful student of humans chooses pressure that reveals, not pressure that breaks. I divide the game into 3 levels so we can sort behavior without raising our voices. The soft level is listening only. It speaks in micro pushes below 0.001 meters per second squared, if any, choosing geometry over thrust when adjustments are needed. It never trespasses and never startles. The grey level introduces decoys that breed retests, such as glints that mimic thin films or timing that mimics our cadence. It makes us waste passes without touching us. The hard level remains collision-free, but dips a toe into spoofing, echoing shapes in our radar phase, or murmuring in bands near our instruments to watch us flinch. All 3 levels share the same mask. No harm, no heat, no gloating. From these sketches fall a set of technical indicators we can check without drama. If we change cadence and the roll period shifts a hair to follow, someone is reading our metronome. If we shorten a roll packet from 5 cycles to 4 and the length echoes our change on the next pass, someone is watching our handovers. If we turn the radar transmitter off and the specular point relaxes, then lights when we turn it on again, someone is dancing in our echo. If we publish a new safety rule and the orbit shows a small, careful step that reflects that rule on the next visit, a listener is mapping our doctrine. Lack of correlation does not kill the idea, but correlation that survives geometry earns weight. The risk in saying these words out loud is obvious. Talk of opponents breeds opponents in the mind. Talk of training and adversaries invites politics into a lab that should welcome only humility and method. A cautious practice can be misread as attack by a tired shift or by a frightened office far away. Public conversation overheats faster than numbers rise, so we add cooling around hot moments, reduce emissions we do not need, announce results in plain language with units and universal time, keep a multinational line open, limit lasers, do not lock a target longer than the corridor demands, pair data ethics with space safety until they feel like one rule. Defeat must be written before enthusiasm. I keep a page that writes the death of Hypothesis 3 in simple terms. The hypothesis is dead if our actions and the object's behavior fail to couple across repeated corridors. It is dead if the pattern of probe, pause, and repeat never appears within stated geometric tolerances. It is dead if the path, the roll, and the shelf of acceleration match a natural aerogravity retune or a reconnaissance of volatiles with no need to mention human response. It is dead if we detect active emissions or thermal plumes that violate do no harm. We will not move the posts after the game begins. We fix them now in cold ink. Because the claim is heavy, the test must be gentle and clear. We pre-register behaviors that would support the idea and behaviors that would kill it, and we freeze the forms before we collect. We agree on gates for signal-to-noise ratio and on timeouts for pauses. We assign 3 teams to watch 3 rubrics, 1 for timing against our actions, 1 for geometry against safe paths, and 1 for radiation or emissions. We process in parallel, and we allow no team to read another's notes until the first verdicts are written. We publish our forms alongside our results so strangers can audit the shape of our thinking. Transparency is not theatre here, it is armor. There is a human side to this, and I will not leave it out. The room warms when the word adversarial enters. Shoulders rise, jokes turn brittle, and breaths shorten. My job is to flatten my voice until the word becomes another noun among instruments. Rhea keeps geometry honest even when nerves buzz. KG shelters limits from heroics. Sahana exiles metaphors when they try to sneak into logs. We do not rehearse anger. We rehearse clarity. If someone is measuring our maturity, we will show them a crew that slows down to get things right. Not every correlation means purpose. The sky can rhyme by accident for a night or two. We will ask whether any coupling survives a change in time zone, a change in phase angle, and a small change in pointing. We will test weekends versus weekdays because humans change on calendars even when stars do not. We will test the speed of our public statements by agreeing in advance to slow or to hasten them for one corridor, then watching for mirrored strides we did not request. We will label coincidence honestly and keep our hands off headlines until patterns earn letters. I return to the numbers because numbers keep me steady when stories try to steer. The roll breathes at 19.7 seconds. The amplitude lives near 2 degrees peak to peak. The corridor holds 47 seconds of useful view. The altitude sits at about 6,000 kilometers above the surface. The difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration sits near 0.0007 meters per second squared and arrives as a stable shelf. The reflectance near 530 nanometers hums when geometry blurs and quiets when geometry clears. These are not poetry, these are rails. I write a plain prayer for the room and for myself. Let us not love mystery more than method. Let us not fear headlines more than error bars. Let us prefer sentences we can audit to stories we can sell. Let us treat limits as rails that bring us home, not fences that clip our wings. If Hypothesis 3 is true, we are being timed for patience, for restraint, and for integrity, and we must meet that clock with calm hands and clear speech. If hypothesis 3 is false, then this story reveals who we are, how much we love drama, how well we can choose clarity over comfort, and how deeply we believe in limits when they cost us applause. Either way, we win by being careful. We are not soldiers here, we are custodians of a night that belongs to anyone willing to count. If someone has come to study us, we will teach them what we hope to be, a species that counts before it jumps, that publishes before it boasts, that slows itself when fear hurries it. If no one has come, the act of preparing to be watched will still have improved us. I feel the small gravity of the moon under my boots. The truss hums, powder whispers, the corridor waits. The next chapter is a suite of tests written in cool ink. When the examiner returns, we will greet the silence with numbers and greet the numbers with humility. Now, I register the null before I lift a finger. If the object does not couple with our actions across more than one corridor, there is no adversarial training and the idea must fold. I state the gates again so fatigue cannot move them later. A feature earns attention when the signal-to-noise ratio holds at 10 or higher on 2 frames or spikes at 12 once. We pause collection if the ratio drops below 8 for 10 seconds. Every change we make to our behavior is pre-registered in the log with time, purpose, and outcome. We will not chase patterns that our own hands created by mistake. The room breathes easier when defeat is written before victory. With that promise in plain language, I move to the protocols that can confirm a coupling or cut the thread. Now, Protocol A begins with cadence because timing is the thin skin over human nerves. In one corridor, I shorten our cadence to 1.5 seconds while holding exposure time at 1 second. In the next corridor, I lengthen the cadence to 2.5 seconds with the same exposure time. I do not touch geometry, focus, or the roll axis unless safety demands it. If the object's 19.7-second breathing shifts to shadow our change, I flag the file and raise the weight on training. If the breathing stays stubborn while our rhythm moves, the claim loses air. We also check the green reflectance near 530 nanometers against the new beat because a coupling should echo in more than one line. Timing is the cheapest nudge we own, and a watcher will hear it. The metronome steps left, right, and numbers lead, not hope. Protocol B toggles the radar to test for a mirrored echo. We continue to listen at 9.6 GHz and weave in 5-second bursts of transmission followed by 10 seconds of quiet. I mark each burst with a clean timestamp. If the specular point brightens or the radar phase nods in step with our bursts, then something out there is dancing with our noise. If nothing answers the pattern, we chalk what we see to tricks of the tail or to slope on the ground. To guard against fooling ourselves, we randomize a few burst times inside the plan, so an echo must follow truth, not prediction. I also track whether the green reflectance wavers in sync with the bursts, because coupling across light and echo would be hard to fake. A partner who moves when we clap is listening, even if the partner never speaks. Protocol C plays with public tempo while we watch for orbit tempo. On one night, we publish a plain statement within 15 minutes after the corridor closes. On the next night, we wait 60 minutes before we say anything beyond the room. I am not hunting headlines. I am moving the timestamp of our noise. If the orbit shows a small shift in timing or packet placement after we speak, the note goes into the book with a mark for coupling. If behavior ignores our timing games, we take that as a gift. Silence simplifies the map. We also record who speaks first and who holds back because an examiner could be studying our command chain as well as our instruments. When we shift our own beat on purpose, a true story either follows or keeps walking. Deliberately, Protocol D moves geometry with the care of a surgeon. I take the spectrometer slit a hair farther from the bright limb and I tilt the incidence angle by a few degrees while staying inside safety. If the object responds by moving its 5-cycle packets, or by shifting the small positive shelf in acceleration to keep us near the edge of glare, the link between their behavior and ours gains weight. If nothing changes except our nerves, the story of training loses air. I keep a second pair of hands on the controls to avoid bias, and I read mount currents and the vibration floor so a cough does not masquerade as a reply. We repeat the move on the next corridor. A single echo could be luck. Geometry is a language, and we are writing a question. To make numbers serve decisions rather than fog them, we define our measures with words and with thresholds. First is the delay between our act and any reply seen in roll timing or in radar phase, measured in seconds against universal time. Second is the height and duty of the green reflectance near 530 nanometers as the corridor plays out. Third is the size and persistence of the positive acceleration shelf near 0.0007 meters per second squared. Fourth is the rate at which the pattern repeats across nights and across corridors, because stamina hints at purpose. Fifth is the stability of our instruments during the span, so a cough in the mount or a drift in calibration cannot take a bow meant for the object. We decide with rails, not with wishes. Imposters still circle. Our mount carries a heartbeat that can stamp rhythm into motion if we let it run too warm or too cold. The tail behind Mars bends phase and can make radar nods that mimic dialogue. The bright limb can pour glare into a slit and paint a false rise on the green band. Rock slopes can aim a mirror for a second, then snatch it away. Calibration drifts like a thief who knocks softly. Against each, we hold knives we have used before. We step exposure time in prime numbers, so shutter rhythm cannot keep pace. We move the view by a small amount to test slope and glare. We compare with a terrain map to check whether geometry pulls the strings. We keep crosstalk below -60 decibels and confirm hot pixels are 0. A true signal lives after the knives finish their work. Independence and repetition hold the keys. We ask the sky for at least 2 corridors with similar geometry, and we process each through 3 independent teams: spectra, radar, and timing. The files carry settings and clocks, but not our favorite words. Only when 2 independent paths report the same relation between our action and the object's response do we allow ourselves to speak beyond the room. If only one path sees a link, the note is tentative and the story remains seated. We post our pre-registered gates and stop rules beside the plot so later eyes can test. We also publish raw frames and timestamps so strangers can try to break our claim. A pattern that survives 2 corridors and 2 minds grows roots. A pattern that wilts under travel and scrutiny was never a pattern at all. I write the tree for defeat in cold ink and post it where I cannot hide it. Hypothesis 3 dies if there is no durable relation between our acts and the object's roll or radar phase across more than one corridor. It dies if the expected probe, pause, and repeat rhythm never appears inside tolerances. It dies if the light curve, the positive shelf in acceleration, and the reflectance fit either an aerogravity retune or a reconnaissance of volatiles without human response. It dies if geometry alone can conjure or erase the shelf. It dies if we detect active emissions or warm plumes that violate do no harm. The point is clean language and posted rules. Defeat written early protects truth later because we cannot move a line we have already nailed to the table. We accept that cost. How we speak the outcome can cool a room or set it on fire. We will announce in plain language with universal time and units. We will place what we do not know beside what we claim to know, and we will release raw frames, timestamps, and instrument settings so strangers can audit us. We will avoid verbs that smuggle motive into motion. We will describe behavior first and leave purpose aside until independent paths agree. Clarity is mercy. When the page is signed, the corridor will return, and the next chapter will ask what hides inside the hiss. We will meet it with numbers, not posture. Properly. Silence in space is never empty. It is a hiss, a living floor of noise made of thermal jitter, cosmic rays, and the soft breath of our own instruments. When the screen shows nothing, it is showing the contest between signal and that floor. I tell myself this every hour so I will not mistake quiet for absence. We define the hiss with care, then ask whether any new shape rises above it. If nothing rises, that is a result, but not a verdict. A mute corridor might still hold a whisper below reach. So we learn the sound of silence until we can name its grain. Not hearing is information, but it is not the same as nothing. I write it plainly. A null result does not equal 0. A null result means not detected at the current sensitivity, not that the phenomenon does not exist. We set thresholds, we looked, and nothing crossed the bar. Tomorrow, with sharper ears or better geometry, the same object might sing above the floor. So we do not stamp absence on a page when we have only measured our limit. We publish the size of our ears, the shape of our stare, and the width of the corridor. We keep verbs honest. We say not detected at current sensitivity. We do not say does not exist. The sentence matters, because sentences become maps that others will follow in the dark. Upper limits deserve language, not code. We say we do not report features when the signal-to-noise ratio stays below 10. We say we did not see a green peak near 530 nanometers above 1%. We say the difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration did not exceed 0.0005 meters per second squared within our confidence. Each sentence is a fence placed where we could still see ground. A fence is not a wall. It marks what we could not step beyond without guessing. We publish those fences so others can lean on them and decide where to build the next ladder. Clarity about limits turns silence into usable structure. The hiss is a character we must meet before we try to write plot. We anchor to stars, normalize the dark, subtract the background, and check for drift. We log slit temperature, motor current, and the vibration under our boots. We keep the baseline clean enough that a future skeptic can believe it. If the baseline is dirty, even a big voice can look like a smudge. Clean baselines make null results valuable because they tell collaborators exactly what level of whisper we could not hear. We keep calibration lamps honest and record the order of every step. We state the noise floor in words. A baseline turns quiet into evidence, and evidence into a promise we can keep. Silence tempts 3 easy mistakes. First, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. A quiet pass may simply mean we listened at the wrong angle. Second, not seeing today does not mean not seeing tomorrow, because geometry and patience move like tides. Third, silence does not declare safety. A corridor without spikes might only mean a careful pilot or a cautious instrument. We teach these counterexamples to our interns and to ourselves. Mars changes posture, our gear ages, our minds grow tired. So we put reminders on the console where fear or pride can see them. Silence is just data, and data acquires meaning only after we test the room from more than one doorway again and again. Sometimes a line of nulls begins to speak in its own way. If not detected, repeats across more than one geometry, across more than one corridor, and across more than one independent channel. The emptiness becomes a strong constraint. No thermal plume across many nights argues against hot thrust. No coupling between roll and radar phase across 3 corridors argues against spoofing and against a pilot courting our attention. Upper bounds stack like bricks, and a model that once sprawled now fits within stricter walls. Each new night adds a brick or removes one. Silence becomes the shape of a cage that keeps theories honest, and the cage grows tighter until only a few patient animals are left inside. We write nulls for strangers to audit. We include sensitivity, universal time, geometry, stop rules, and raw frames. We place what we do not know beside what we think we know. We avoid verbs that sew purpose onto motion. We speak degrees, seconds and meters per second squared with patience. We keep crosstalk below -60 decibels and confirm hot pixels are 0. Then we give the files away for audit. If an outsider can retrace our steps and arrive at the same quiet, our silence is not emptiness. It is a measured outcome with a spine. Transparency is not theater here. It is armor that protects truth when excitement threatens to rewrite our notes in brighter ink. Consider the case of the missing green surge. Earlier, a small rise near 530 nanometers flirted with our attention. We changed geometry and stepped exposure time through prime numbers, and the surge evaporated. That behavior is the signature of glare from the limb or a slope on rock, not frost and not intention. We lower the weight on intent, keep a small question open for material, and walk away without regret. The night does not owe us a headline, we owe it honesty. We document geometry changes and timestamps. A disappearing peak is a gift because it tells us where not to dig and leaves our shovels sharp for the places that keep shining under tests. Consider the role that refuses to partner on a given night. The period remains 19.7 seconds, the swing lives near 2 degrees, and the packets still prefer 5 cycles, yet nothing else keeps time with it. Radar phase ignores the breathing, reflectance ignores the breathing. The acceleration panel shows no shelf married to the rhythm. In that case, we demote the roll to natural spin and stop letting it steer our questions. We also tighten calibration and check mount heartbeat to be sure no internal gear set the drum. The world is full of rhythms with no secret inside. A rhythm without companions is a solo, and a solo can be beautiful without meaning anything beyond itself. Silence is not the end of our work, it is the start of a cleaner phase. From a night of quiet, we plan the next tests, increase sensitivity, change the angle a little, lengthen repetition, and add a thermal channel. Each change asks whether the hiss itself moved or whether we learned to step around it. I write our to-do list in plain speech so the room reads it the same way at 3 in the morning. Then I open the door to a story. We owe the sky honesty, patience, and restraint. Silence plants questions that deserve care, and the next chapter answers them by counting together, under a title we believe, What We Owe the Sky. I return to the nickel question and speak it in ordinary words. The nickel question is not about hunting metal because it glitters. It asks what nickel stands for in our measurements, a surface that reflects radar cleanly, a density that changes how a body turns, a skin that tolerates heat, and a fingerprint that might reveal workmanship. Nickel in my mouth tonight is a shorthand for material choice and energy strategy. If the object wears nickel or behaves like it does, then our guesses about intent, durability, and heat control sharpen. If it does not, the question still helps, because it forces me to ask which other materials could mimic those traits. Either way, nickel is a lens, not a verdict. If not nickel, then a decision about material was made, and decisions leave tracks we can read. Nickel is a crossroads between material and intent. On one road, nature smelts iron and nickel in deep time, and fragments drift as meteorites. On the other road, a builder plates or polishes a surface to manage heat, glare, erosion, and charge. Radar that returns bright can be born, or it can be made. I warn myself not to leap from shiny at 9.6 GHz to built by hands. A bright echo needs a second witness before it can testify about purpose. Copper can sing. Ice can sing. Polish alone can sing. Only when 2 independent channels agree do intent-shaped words earn air. The second witness might be timing that couples radar phase to the roll, or a shelf in acceleration that refuses to depend on view. Without that partner, bright is only bright. Why would nickel shout to our radar at 9.6 GHz? The physics wears simple clothes when I tell it. Nickel conducts well, so currents flow near the skin and throw a clean echo back. The depth of attention at that band is thin, so the very surface rules the song. If the micro surface is smooth, the specular point stays tight when we tilt the view by a small angle. If the surface is rough, the echo scatters crumbs instead of a sheet. A nickel-rich face should keep intensity stubborn, while the phase nods gently as geometry shifts. If a bright echo survives small tilts and keeps its phase in step, we add weight to material. If the echo crumbles or the phase wanders for trivial reasons, we lower weight and keep looking. Visible and near-infrared light carry their own clues. Raw nickel looks grey with a flat slope and does not crave colour. Iron oxide leans red and brown and drags the curve that way. A thin film can play games with colour by interference, adding a faint green lift near 530 nanometers without shouting. That lift can be real, or it can be a trick of glare leaking past the limb. A single peak cannot baptize a surface with a name. The whole curve must stand, and it must stand when we change the angle and the exposure time using prime steps. A lonely summit is not a mountain, and a single green does not spell a metal. We expect that a real film will repeat at matching angles later, while glare will fade when geometry shifts. Density walks into the room next, and it carries inertia with it. A body rich in metal will spin and respond differently than a foam of stone. Light curves tell that story if we listen long enough. A dense shell damps the small jitters that a porous shape might amplify. Our night has shown a roll at 19.7 seconds with a swing near 2 degrees, organized into packets of 5 cycles. If a small positive difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration keeps its shelf near 0.0007 meters per second squared, guidance is working, not luck. A hollow rock bumps and wobbles, a guided weight glides. When mass leads, posture follows, and noise learns to sit. We will fit a free spin model and bow if it wins. A coating can make a liar out of any raw skin, which is why the green question returns. There are 3 broad options. First, an engineered thin film meant to control heat or reflectivity can raise or lower bands, especially near the green, when the angle is right. Second, a weathered layer can build itself slowly and act like a film without a blueprint. Third, interference can arise on a very smooth face even if the substance beneath is plain. We attack all 3 with the same knives. We change the angle by a small stated amount. We step exposure time through primes so shutters cannot hum along. If the green lift keeps its shape, we give weight to material. If it slides with our timing, we call it a shutter drum and set it aside. What would Mars offer a nickel lover? The costs are gentle. Gravity is small and patience buys reach. The corridor gives 47 seconds, long enough to nudge and to measure. Benefits could include better heat shedding, stronger radiation shielding, and a more obedient specular point for our radar to tag. Risks are small here, far from Earth noise, close to shared geometry that others can audit without politics. If someone wants to retune a course or to validate a film, Mars is a good theater with a decent stage crew. 47 seconds of clean geometry can buy years of clean travel. The moons add perches that let us hold the slit off the limb while keeping view steady. A small change in posture here echoes far into deep space. The energy budget stays kind and the calendar stays calm. I draw 3 living pictures and pin them side by side. The first is a natural iron-nickel fragment. It returns a bright radar sheet and shrugs at small tilts. It spins like a stone that grew heavy, not like a toy being steered, and its light curve fits a free body that minds only inertia. The second is a plated surface built for duty. It keeps a stable echo, shows a faint green lift that breathes with the roll packets and stays cold at our sensitivity. The third is an active radiator, small and shy. It shows a tiny thermal pulse that rises and falls as load changes, and the radar phase wanders a little in step. 3 stories, 3 tests, 3 ways to be wrong or right. We do not choose favorites here. We choose predictions and let the sky answer. Predictions fall out of those pictures like tools from a tidy box. For the natural iron-nickel case, the light curve should hug a free spin model and no marriage should appear between roll and radar phase. For the plated surface, the green lift should hold when we change exposure time, and the radar phase should nod on the same beats as the 5 cycle packets. For the radiator, a tiny thermal pulse should rise and fall while load changes, and the radar phase should lag by a small, steady amount. We test each with the same gates for signal-to-noise ratio and with matched geometry, and we publish the fences we used. We will accept only when the ratio holds at 10 or higher. We will log universal time, angles and settings so others can audit our claims. The nickel question is also a budget, not just a name. Nickel is heavy and honest. It resists heat and takes polish. It costs energy to lift and to move. If you bring it with you, you have reasons. If you plate with it, you want a surface that talks to heat and to radio in a language you can predict. If you do not bring it, you want something that behaves the same without the weight. In every case, the choice advertises priorities: reliability over sprint, endurance over flare, measurability over mystery. Material is policy made solid. There is a social side that enters the room when the word nickel crosses a page. People hear coins, armor, machines, and knives. The crew hears radar, mass, and skin. The public hears metallurgy as a proxy for intent. So I slow the story down in briefings. I put the radar return next to the light curve and the roll. I say 2 channels must agree before we use intent-shaped words. I point at the green lift and say it could be a film, a glare, or an echo. I keep words like manufactured and alloy in a drawer until numbers call them out by name. Clarity is not shy, it is careful. If the nickel picture wins, what next? We would sketch a policy that treats reflectivity, density, and thermal posture as clues, not as verdicts. We would repeat the corridor and change angle in measured steps. We would ask another station to read the same page with a different alphabet. We would invite ground-based partners to try polarized light and longer wavelengths. We would publish frames and times and places so rivals can aim carefully and prove us wrong. If Nickel keeps singing after that trial, then material and guidance will have agreed to the same tune. A song that survives other ears deserves to be called real. If the Nickel picture fails, the exercise still pays for itself in better habits. We will have sharpened our radar discipline, improved our exposure games, and rehearsed our courage in saying "not detected" at current sensitivity. We will have taught interns why a single green peak cannot carry a thesis across a room. We will have posted new fences where they help next crews. Failure in a lab is forward motion when it closes doors we do not need and lights paths we do. In that spirit, I keep the question open while the data learns to walk. I admit the human itch that hides inside the metal talk. Nickel whispers of craft, of ships that survive heat and void, of edges that stay sharp after long work. I feel the glamour of that image and lay it down beside the numbers to see whether it stains them. The numbers are calm. They do not blush for romance. They do not sneer at it either. They sit and wait, asking to be read aloud at the same speed as always. If Nickel earns a place in our story, it will be because the radar, the light curve, the roll, and the shelf in acceleration stand together without our help. Desire is not data. So the Nickel question does not answer by itself. It points, it narrows, it trains our eyes to see where surface, mass, and heat conspire. It asks for two independent paths and for repetition across corridors. It asks for patience with the green lift and discipline with the radar. It asks us to love craft less than truth. Next, the story walks into cities, classrooms, and kitchen tables, where words must be kind without being weak. A coin is only money when it changes hands, and a question is only science when it changes minds. We will carry frames, times, and units in, and we will carry humility. If Nickel wins, we will say how we know. If it fails, we will state the lesson. We will keep counting, carefully, together, under a patient sky. Information pressurization is what happens when raw data, public expectation, and our release plans squeeze into the same narrow corridor. The pressure shows up in our breathing, in our word choices, and in how we treat each observation window. I feel it in my wrists when the metronome gets loud. The rule that saves us is simple: reduce pressure with ordinary language and steady cadence. One sentence, one idea, say numbers once, spell the units. Speak universal time. Name the stop rules. Leave drama at the door. Silence between sentences is method. When the corridor opens, we keep calm speech and clean logs. Hold the pressure. Do not pop. Let clarity carry the weight so the data stays clean. Shared language keeps pressure low. I speak slowly, and I give each number room. I say 5 minutes before the observation window opens instead of codes. I say signal to noise ratio, meters per second squared, degrees, and universal time. I pronounce decimals as 0 point and then the digits. I avoid letters that can sound like other letters. I avoid symbols that screens can mangle. I keep verbs plain and place the noun near the verb so meaning does not wander. I read thresholds once and do not gild them. I pause after times and units so listeners can mark the line. I correct myself if I stumble. Slow words make steady beams that carry weight without bending. In the city, a public statement should lower the room's temperature. I write a neutral title, 3 sentences of summary, and a time range in universal time. I place what we know beside what we do not know. I link to raw frames and to instrument settings. I keep verbs descriptive and refuse verbs that smuggle intent. Before release, the statement passes an internal green light, a legal check, and a courtesy line. We add contact points for technical questions and for safety questions. We avoid hype even when asked for color. We include thresholds and stop rules so anyone can audit our caution. We state that repetition matters and that one corridor does not make a verdict. We remind readers that silence is data, not a vacuum. Calm words reduce pressure. The city sleeps when the numbers speak. In a classroom, I teach the night in 45 minutes with breathing space. I open with 5 minutes of images that show Mars, the tail, and our station above the limb. I spend 15 minutes on simple models of signal-to-noise ratio and delta A, the difference in acceleration. I use coins, a flashlight, and a stopwatch. I spend 10 minutes on why a null is not zero and how upper limits work in plain words. I spend 10 minutes on reading a plot without getting lost in color. We finish with 5 minutes of questions. I keep every sentence short, every unit spoken, and every number tied to universal time. I end with a reminder: repeat runs matter more than headlines. The class leaves ready to explain the night at a kitchen table, calmly and clearly. At a kitchen table, I keep to 3 sentences that fit on a breath. First sentence: here is what we saw. A reflectance near 530 nanometers rose and fell. The roll breathed at 19.7 seconds, and the difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration stayed small and positive. Second sentence: here is the limit. We trust features when the signal-to-noise ratio is 10 or higher, and we pause if it drops below 8 for 10 seconds. Third sentence: here is the next step. We repeat the corridor and change the angle a little. If someone asks why, I answer how first. If someone asks when, I answer with universal time. If someone asks what it means, I say it means we will look again. 3 sentences beat a speech when coffee is cooling. Interviews bring fast air and bright lights, so I carry a small kit. I avoid verbs that assign intent, and I favor verbs that describe motion and measurement. I ask for 2 independent channels before I upgrade language. When a question chases a headline, I repeat the measurement, state the threshold, and decline hot guesses. I do not say pilot when I can say roll. I do not say engine when I can say small positive acceleration. I keep the clock visible and ask to speak universal time. I refer to raw frames and settings. I explain what not detected at current sensitivity means. I remind the room that null is not zero. Nobody loses by being honest about error bars and limits, and a careful answer lowers pressure more than any breathtaking claim could. Spoken calmly and clearly, numbers need small bridges to everyday life. I say a signal-to-noise ratio of 10 means barely clear, and 12 means clear. I say 0.0007 meters per second squared means a very gentle push that repeats. I say 19.7 seconds is the breathing pace of posture, not a shout. I compare the corridor length to 47 seconds of holding your breath. I say 6,000 kilometers is far, but not so far that geometry loses its edge. I say 530 nanometers is a shade of green your eye knows. I explain that universal time lets kitchens read the same clock. These bridges do not dumb the work down, they let people carry it. Translation is not decoration, it is load-bearing craft that keeps truth in one piece. Open files lower pressure because secrecy invites heat. Our release bundle includes raw frames, universal timestamps, pointing, slit temperature, mount currents, exposure time, and stop rules. We add a note on the noise floor, the method for dark normalization, and any geometry changes during the corridor. We state crosstalk limits below -60 decibels and show the test that proved hot pixels are 0. We include short code that reproduces plots. We put what we do not know beside what we know. We avoid promises about why. We make it possible for a rival to break our claim with care, because that is how truth stays. Transparency is not a gift from experts. It is a shared tool that lets cities, classrooms, and kitchen tables hold the same frame and read the same clock, safely and openly. Pressure is part of the work, bursting is optional. We keep pressure inside rails by speaking slowly, by publishing clearly, and by teaching what we measure. Calm words invite calm eyes, and calm eyes guard data. We tell cities what we saw and what we did not see. We show classrooms how to test a claim. We give kitchen tables a way to follow without fear. We remember that a careful no is as valuable as a brilliant yes when safety and trust are in play. Hold the pressure, do not pop. Next, we carry these habits onto field ops, Phobos, Deimos, and Elysium, and let rules breathe under open sky while we measure and speak without harming the corridor safely. Field operations begin with doctrine, not bravado. We keep one sentence for one idea, and we speak in ordinary words even when the clock runs loud. Safety comes before speed, and clarity comes before style. Go or no go rides on the signal-to-noise ratio and on the narrow corridor that lasts 47 seconds. We pause if the ratio drops below 8 for 10 seconds. We stop if limits tighten beyond what the corridor can forgive. I hold sensors and the clock. Rear guards geometry. KG protects safe distance and keeps alarms honest. Sahana weighs meaning against material and keeps us from naming wishes. We brief before we touch controls, we rehearse the handover words, and we post stop rules where tired minds can see them. The creed is simple: measure first, explain later. Calm speech, clean logs, and respect for limits turn courage into procedure. Measure before you narrate, because stories are light and data is heavy, and heavy work needs rails. On Phobos, I set the night shift on the truss and listen for the low tremor that means the structure is awake. I lock the vibration floor and note its value in the log, then route dust counters to a separate channel so spikes cannot creep into light. I place the spectrometer slit off the bright limb by a safe hair that keeps glare out of the throat. I confirm slit temperature, motor current, focus lock, and pointing, each spoken in order and signed with universal time. I begin and end every run with a star field to catch drift in the optics and to keep our baselines honest. I stage a spare link in case small quakes twitch the mount. I keep a second headset ready in case my voice goes ragged. Rhea plots the corridor edges while I hold the axis steady. The truss hums, powder whispers, and the planet burns along the rim. We breathe together and keep the picture still. Deimos gives us a slant view that slices confusion into smaller pieces. From there we can separate glare from slope and tail from surface. I keep the radar at 9.6 GHz in listen mode and mark echoes that hold while we tilt a little. We synchronize the Deimos clock to the Phobos clock within 1 millisecond so frames can mate without argument. We schedule twin corridors 1 orbit apart so both stations can write the same page in slightly different alphabets. We repeat the slit offset and the cadence so differences are not our fault. We keep exposure time at 1 second and cadence at 2 seconds unless safety changes the plan. Deimos hands us clean geometry for specular checks and gifts us patience when Phobos shakes. When both stations see the same nod in radar phase and the same breath in roll, noise runs out of masks. Two eyes see deeper than one, especially when the sky is trying to fool you. The wide plane of Elysium Planitia invites long, steady scans for smooth skins and quiet specular points. We pick a track that crosses candidate patches, then pair the plan with a forecast of the tail shaped by the solar wind. We stitch 2 or 3 corridors of 47 seconds into a longer strip by stepping the pointing in small, measured bites. We hold altitude near 6,000 kilometers, so geometry and safety stay stable across the seam. I leave room for a return pass so we can test repetition without moving to a new stage. The mount rehearses the stepping schedule during daylight, so muscle memory carries us when the window opens. We keep the photometer watching sky glow, the spectrometer sipping color, and the radar listening for a polite nod. When a strip closes, we flip to a star field, check drift, and reset the nerves with breathing and tea. Long seams built from short corridors let patience do work that force cannot. I move through the mobile checklist so the room can hear our rails. Power first, then thermal, then communications, then safety switches. Panels read strong, batteries are healthy, and reserves are posted in the margin. Sensor temperatures rest inside the working band, with heaters ready but quiet. Uplink and downlink show clean margins, and frame identifiers march in order without gaps. Safe mode boundaries are set and broadcast. The abort path is printed on the wall where the sleepy can see it. We lock the attitude axis when the signal-to-noise ratio holds at 10 or higher, and we unlock when geometry demands a step. We record universal time with every action so later eyes can trace cause and effect. Nothing here is glamorous. Everything here is necessary. Checklists are courage written in advance, and tonight they keep our hands from shaking. Collection follows a rhythm we train into our hands. And the roll breathes at 19.7 seconds, so we use packets of 5 cycles to fake a hover over each point of interest. Exposure time is 1 second, cadence is 2 seconds. Between packets we breathe and correct. During each packet we hold the axis and let the spectrometer sip. When a signal starts to flirt, we step exposure time through prime numbers, so any shutter rhythm loses the beat and any imposter runs out of excuses. We favor frames that crest at a signal-to-noise ratio of 12, while never ignoring steady 10s that keep truth quiet and steady. If reflectance near 530 nanometers rises in step with the packets, we mark the beat. If radar phase nods in the same breath, we mark the braid. We do not chase spikes that vanish when cadence changes. We accept patience as a tool. Safety margins define the work as much as targets do. We draw keep-out zones around assets and around lines of sight we will not cut. We keep the spectrometer slit a safe distance from the limb so glare does not pour into the throat. When we must use beacons, we practice laser discipline, never too long, never above the posted power, and never near a path someone else is using. We keep the no collision rule as a first principle. We keep do no harm as a creed, not a slogan. We confirm safe distance from active satellites before and after every corridor. If any limit flickers, KG calls pause, and we obey in the same breath. Bravery is a clean log under pressure, not a dare. Contingencies live in the drawer right below the main switch. When dust rises, I shorten exposure time and let the radar do more listening while the spectrometer waits. When the sun sends a storm, we narrow activity to logging and housekeeping until charged particles calm down. If the target slips, we execute a search and reacquire pattern that trades speed for certainty and keeps the slit off the limb. If the signal-to-noise ratio sits below 8 for 10 seconds, we pause collection and stabilize, even if the corridor still glares with promise. If a mount heartbeat creeps into the roll, we cool the motors, retune the loop, and try again. If any channel misbehaves, we lower its weight and let the others lead. The plan is not a prophecy, it is a parachute that opens when pride would rather fall. Data must travel with its own proof of custody. We normalize the dark, subtract the background, and anchor to stars before a single plot is drawn. We compute a hash for every frame and pin a signature to each with universal time. We record slit temperature, motor current, and the vibration floor for every segment so a future skeptic can weigh drift against doubt. We attach all settings and any geometry changes that occur during the pass. We push the set into 3 independent pipelines that do not read one another's notes. We require that 2 independent paths agree before any sentence grows a spine. Provenance is the quiet twin of precision, and without both the story slides off the page. Success in the field is not applause, it is a handoff. We win when we carry a clean 47 seconds without glare, when 2 independent channels agree, and when upper limits are written plainly. We pass map linking Phobos, Deimos, and Elysium to analysis. We open the window by reciting our vows, 1 sentence, 1 idea. Speak slowly in ordinary words. Exposure time is 1 second, cadence is 2 seconds. The slit sits off the bright limb. We keep the corridor in view for 47 seconds and we do not rush. We record in universal time and spell the units. We accept the stop rule without debate. We pause if the signal-to-noise ratio sits below 8 for 10 seconds. Rolls are fixed. I hold sensors and the clock. RIA steers geometry. KG guards safe distance and keeps alarms honest. Sahana weighs material against meaning and bans metaphors from the log. We whisper the checklist and then say it aloud so our hands remember. Breath follows cadence, numbers follow breath. The creed is simple and strict: measure first, explain later, and let limits protect both courage and data. Compared with the last corridor, tonight the geometry tilts a little. The phase angle shifts by a small amount that RIA reads into the console. Altitude stays near 6,000 kilometers above the surface, inside our comfort rail. The magnetotail leans more toward our station, which can lift background and bend phase. That lean may move the green surge near 530 nanometers or change how the radar phase nods. We refresh the tail forecast from the solar wind and time our approach to the calmer side. RIA redraws the corridor edges and checks that the slit stays off the limb. I verify that cadence and exposure still sample the roll cleanly at 19.7 seconds. KG recalculates safe distance and posts keep out zones. Sahana notes which changes could mimic signal and which could reveal it. Adjust. Baseline comes next, and we say each step aloud. Anchor to a star field. Normalize the dark. Subtract the background. Check for drift. Record slit temperature, motor current, and the vibration floor, then watch them settle. Confirm clock sync to universal time within 1 millisecond. Sweep the detector for hot pixels and demand 0. Measure crosstalk and enforce below -60 decibels. Nudge focus and lock it. Verify pointing, then nudge again because nerves lie. We speak the numbers as if reading a map that must guide a stranger in our place. If any meter wanders, we fix it now, not later. A clean baseline turns quiet into evidence, and evidence into a promise we can keep. Only then do we open the corridor to meaning. The floor must be steady before we dare to weigh a whisper. Now we aim at aerogravity. The slit stays off the limb. I open the acceleration panel and compare the model with the line the data draws. Predicted acceleration is posted. Measured acceleration grows 1 point at a time. Delta A, the difference between them, must show a small, stable, positive shelf if tuning is real. The roll breathes at 19.7 seconds, and we test whether breathing couples to radar phase. The X-band stays in listen unless reflectance falls below 1%. We watch for no thermal plume at our sensitivity. If the shelf holds through changes in view and radar nods on the same beat, hypothesis 1 gains weight. If the shelf wobbles with geometry or the nod drifts, we lower our bet. We read the plot in plain words, so hope cannot hide inside a symbol. Now we aim at volatiles. We revisit the grid cells and hold hover stairs over their centers. The spectrometer keeps attention near 530 nanometers and watches the whole curve. We step exposure time through primes so any shutter rhythm cannot pretend to be frost. The rule is simple. A real green surge must repeat when the viewing angle repeats and must ignore our exposure games. Meanwhile, the radar hunts for specular points that stay tight when we tilt a little. If a specular echo survives a change in angle and the green breath keeps time with the roll, the case improves. If either fades with our steps, we chalk it as geometry or glare. We favor repeats over bright single frames, and we write our doubts in log. Hope stands outside the room until numbers invite it in. Now we test the adversarial run. Within safe rails, I vary cadence across the corridor while exposure time stays 1 second. I interleave 5-second bursts of radar transmission with 10 seconds of quiet at 9.6 GHz, then shuffle a few bursts to kill prediction. We watch for roll packets that mirror our changes and for radar phase that nods in time with the pattern. We keep geometry steady so a reply cannot blame view. If nothing follows our moves, we lower weight on training and prefer ordinary sky. If something follows and survives a small geometry nudge, we post a coupling and ask for a repeat. KG guards safety during bursts. Ria minds the limb and the angle step. Sahana tracks our timing words so we do not mistake echo for plan. I keep the clock. Now, decisions live on a single page taped near the console. Record when the signal-to-noise ratio holds at 10 or higher. Promote a feature when it crests at 12. Hold if the ratio hovers near 8 but improves under a small adjustment. Abort if the ratio sinks below 8 for 10 seconds. Ria commands geometry and declares holds when the limb creeps near danger. KG owns safe distance, lasers and keep-out zones, and his no means no. I keep the clock, the exposure steps, and the log. Sahana listens for language that runs ahead of evidence and cuts it back. All 4 of us repeat the stop rules at the top of the minute. We do not move gates after we post them. Clear rails make brave choices easier because the rails carry part of the weight. Quality gates define what frames deserve to live in the front of the notebook. Every frame carries universal time, pointing coordinates, slit temperature, focus state, and a corridor tag. We label tonight's collection as Dataset 1. Frames earn gold marks when 3 voices sing together: spectrum, radar, and roll timing. We flag silver when two agree, and the third is clean but quiet. We attach micro-notes for every adjustment, a small tilt, a prime step, a gain change. We keep the notes near the frames so a future skeptic can audit without guessing. RIA signs geometry, KG signs safety, I signs sensors, Sahana signs language. When the corridor closes, we snapshot a star field again and test for drift. The notebook then travels with the bundle, so context never falls off the back of the data. We stamp custody. Surprises will come. We will answer with poise. If a thermal bloom appears, we shorten exposure time and let radar listen longer. If the green surge slides with exposure, we print the word artifact and set it aside. If the roll switches from packets of 5 cycles to packets of 4, we log the event, hold the axis, and watch whether spectrum or radar cares. Guidance might be adapting or a mount might be warm. If delta a changes sign, we halt interpretation and run a calibration check while holding geometry still. If pointing drifts, we reacquire and repeat the last packet with a label. If the signal-to-noise ratio sags, we rest until it climbs above 10 and the corridor breathes. We name each reaction in plain words so the night will be readable when memory grows thin. We close by packaging dataset 1 as if it were evidence that must survive strangers. We include time ranges, angles, settings, hot pixel tests, crosstalk proofs, and the exact words of our stop rules. We send the bundle into 3 independent pipelines, one for spectra, one for radar phase, and one for timing and light curves. Success means 2 independent channels agree on a feature, or upper limits are written where features do not rise. We post the bundle, the raw frames, and the notes in a place rivals can reach. Then we hand the map of Phobos, Deimos, and Elysium to analysis with an index of corridor times. The next chapter is cross-checks and disputes, where knives will cut our claims. We earn trust by making it easy to break us. What survives deserves to stand. 3 pipelines feed one conclusion, and it stands only when at least 2 carry the same shape in the same seconds. The first reads spectra, the second watches radar phase. The third studies timing and the light curve. Each begins with raw frames labeled with universal time, pointing, slit temperature, motor current, and the vibration floor. Each builds its own baseline and its own plots. Agreement requires that a feature clear the gate for signal-to-noise ratio, 10 on 2 frames, or a single crest at 12. It must also appear at the same universal time across 2 paths. When those conditions meet, the room grants provisional trust. Until then, every bright peak remains a rumor. We enforce independence by isolating code and by separating personnel. 2 eyes, 1 clock, and a clean floor. That is how a conclusion earns air here. We run Hypotheses blind. I do not tell the teams which story I prefer. I do not say aerogravity, I do not say volatiles, and I do not say training. I hand them time, angle, settings, stop rules, and a corridor map. I ask them to read numbers before they read any words. Their job is to describe behavior and to avoid verbs that smuggle intent into motion. A sentence must rest on at least 2 independent channels before it tries to stand. Every claim lists the gates it cleared and the frames it used. If someone argues from drama, we send the sentence back. We ban slang that hides meaning. We allow doubt only with a plan to test it. Blind analysis removes pride and replaces it with audit. Synchronization and provenance live at the core of every check. We align universal time across Phobos and Deimos within 1 millisecond so frames can share a spine. We verify a hash for every frame. We compare slit temperature, motor current, and the vibration floor to their tracks and flag outliers. We demand a complete chain of custody. Who held a file, when it moved, which settings changed, and why. If any link is missing, we set the claim aside and repair the record before we touch interpretation. We attach a small narrative to each adjustment in plain words, not codes. We snapshot a star field at the start and at the end to catch drift. Only after these checks do we allow plots to leave the room. Provenance is not vanity. It is armor for the story the data will eventually tell. Statistics can wear plain clothes without losing strength. We say a signal-to-noise ratio of 10 is barely clear, and a ratio of 12 is clear. We explain that confidence lives in intervals, not in crowns. We read medians and spreads in words that a tired reader can pronounce. We phrase the stop rule in speech, pause collection if the ratio sinks below 8 for 10 seconds. We test whether a result survives a small change in angle or cadence. We remind each other that a single bright frame is an anecdote until repetition turns it into evidence. We avoid symbols that screens can scramble. We keep units beside numbers. We choose short captions that say what the plot says and nothing more. The point is not to simplify the work. The point is to make it readable at 3 in the morning. Imposters love costumes, so we keep knives sharp. We vary exposure time in prime steps, so a shutter cannot hum in tune with our hope. We rotate the slit a measured hair farther from the limb to drain glare. We enforce crosstalk below -60 decibels and show the test that proves it. We sweep the detector for hot pixels and demand 0 at the start and 0 at the end. We record universal time for every control touch, so an audit can follow our hands. We move the view by a small stated angle to test slope and specular tricks. Only what remains after these cuts earns the word real on our channel. Everything else becomes a lesson and a fence we will not trip over again. A good knife saves more nights than a clever headline ever could. Geometry and tail state can turn saints into sinners, so we compare them before we argue. We match phase, angle and altitude, which rests near 6,000 kilometers between corridors. We log magnetotail orientation and note when the background rises or calms. A real signal should live through a small, declared change in angle. A false signal will slide with glare, with slope, or with the plasma mood. We write each small adjustment beside the frame so later readers can see cause and effect. If a shelf in the difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration survives the change, we keep it. If a green lift near 530 nanometers fades when angle shifts, we let it go. This discipline keeps desire from dressing up as geometry and walking onto the stage. Disputes happen, and we welcome them into the light. Every disagreement becomes a 2-column record labeled argument and evidence. No metaphors are allowed. We use roll, radar phase, and difference in acceleration, and we cite the numbers that sit beside those names. We ask for a temporary resolution and a matched plan for a falsification test. If 2 teams disagree, we schedule a repeat corridor with a tweak designed to break the tie. We ask each team to write what result would defeat its view and to sign that statement. We pin those sentences where everyone can see them. We remind ourselves that a clean defeat today is cheaper than a messy retraction next month. Arguments with receipts are fuel. Arguments without them are fog. Peer review comes in 2 temperatures. Hot review happens during the shift, where fast eyes catch slips before they grow legs. Cold review happens after 24 hours, when a different crew reads the same files blind. We only upgrade confidence when both temperatures agree. Hot review finds loose cables, mismatched labels and thresholds misread under pressure. Cold review finds fragile logic, unguarded bias and tone that wandered near story. Both are kind because both are strict. We keep checklists for hot review and publish them. We keep formal forms for cold review and publish those too. When both pass, a claim can step past provisional and take 1 breath of open air. We rotate reviewers across instruments to break friendships that could soften edges. We ask one reader to argue against the claim on purpose, and another to argue for it with equal care. Balance keeps us honest, and honesty keeps the room quiet enough for small truths to be heard. When channels disagree, we do not hide the fight. We publish what we know beside what we do not know, with universal time and with units. We release raw frames and the settings that built them. We state which tests are planned and which thresholds will decide the next step. We write corrections in universal time with a reason stated in ordinary words, and we keep a version history that anyone can audit. We avoid verbs that imply motive while motive remains unearned. We declare when a feature fell below a gate. We say not detected at current sensitivity when that is the truth. Transparency cools rooms that might otherwise overheat, and it makes future agreements faster, safer, and calmer. We link plots to frames plainly, always together. Our decision tree lives on a single page. We stamp a temporary conclusion when two independent channels agree and safety has not been scratched. We stamp upper limits when features do not rise, and we state them in the same plain language. When a dispute remains, we schedule the next corridor designed to cut it, and we invite outside auditors to review our forms and our raw frames. We accept that some questions will live for weeks, because patience is part of safety. We keep names off guesses until numbers demand them. Cross-checks are the spine of this story, and disputes are the music. They make the next night better, even when they sting. Soon we will gather the teams for the second debrief and lay the knives, the limits, and the frames on the table. We will speak slowly, and we will let the data go first. We open with the decision board in plain speech. Gates and rails go first. We accept features only when the signal-to-noise ratio holds at 10 on 2 frames, or crests at 12 once. We pause if the ratio dips below 8 for 10 seconds. We do not move posts after we have posted them. 2 independent channels must agree before any word grows a spine. Universal time marks every action. Exposure time stays 1 second unless safety requires change. Cadence stays 2 seconds unless a pre-registered test requires variation. The slit remains safely off the bright limb. We read thresholds aloud at the top of the minute. We log every touch. We treat stop rules as promises, not suggestions. The board stays in view so the room cannot forget its rails. Now I name what survived 2 paths at the same second. The green lift near 530 nanometers rose and fell in step with our 5-cycle roll packets on 2 corridors with matching geometry. The radar phase showed a small but repeatable nod that lined up with those packets within a narrow tolerance. The difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration held a small positive shelf near 0.0007 meters per second squared in both runs. The shelf did not follow pointing changes and did not care about exposure games. Specular spots stayed tight when we tilted a little, and the light curve rejected a free spin model during those windows. Universal timestamps match at the frame level across pipelines. Agreement met our gates and kept its posture under a small nudge. I also name what could not stand. A bright spike in reflectance fell apart when we stepped exposure time through prime numbers. That spike belonged to the shutter, not the sky. A glint that looked like thin frost slipped away when we nudged the viewing angle. A set of frames with high background followed the magneto-tail mood instead of the map. An echo that seemed eager to dance with our radar fell silent when we randomized burst timing. A tiny thermal hint failed to repeat on the next night. All of these lost their masks under simple knives. We lower their weight, write the lesson beside them, and move on. Not detected at current sensitivity is our phrase. It is not a door slammed, it is a fence posted. Here is where the 3 hypotheses stand after 2 nights. Aerogravity retune earns a careful lean toward yes. The positive shelf in acceleration lived through a small geometry tweak. The radar phase nodded with the roll, and no plume rose above our limit. The path looked like a feather that touched the helm without heat. Reconnaissance of subsurface volatiles earns a maybe. The green lift repeated at matching angles and ignored exposure games, but the specular map remains thin and once more strips across Elysium Planitia. The adversarial training run earns a small no for now. Cadence shifts did not pull the roll, and our randomized radar bursts did not coax a dance. We will test again, but purpose has not earned speech. Upper limits now close a few doors. The green peak never rose above 1% over baseline in any cleaned frame. The radar phase shift stayed within a posted tolerance we can defend with blind replays. The difference between measured acceleration and predicted acceleration never exceeded 0.0009 meters per second squared and never reversed for longer than 2 seconds. We saw no thermal plume at our sensitivity. We state these as fences, not as walls. We place what we do not know beside what we do know, and we keep the verbs modest. Limits are gifts when they are written clearly and when strangers can audit them without guessing. I restate our data ethics because endings deserve vows. We will not say why while we have only measured how. We will not place intent where we only have motion. We will prefer transparency over speed. We will publish raw frames, settings, and universal time beside our plots. We will keep "do no harm" as a real rule, not a badge. We will push back on any request to warm the language beyond what 2 independent channels earn. We will remain reachable and calm when questions come. If we make an error, we will correct it in universal time. We will preserve version history, and we will explain the fix in ordinary words. The city, the classroom, and the kitchen table get the same 3-sentence message. One fact: the roll breathes at 19.7 seconds and a small positive shelf in acceleration near 0.0007 meters per second squared repeated on 2 nights. One limit: we trust features at a signal-to-noise ratio of 10 or higher and pause if it sits below 8 for 10 seconds, and we saw no thermal plume at our sensitivity. One next step: we will repeat the corridor, expand the specular map, and invite an outside counterpass. That is the entire story in ordinary words. The rest is patience, safety, and steady work. Ria speaks first. Geometry is a teacher when you listen slowly. KG adds his line. Safety is a number before it is a feeling. Sahana follows. Words are instruments. Let them stay in tune with the data. I close the circle. My job is to count and to keep my voice flat. Each of us names one lesson and pins it to the board where the next crew can see it. We sign the page with calm hands. We leave metaphors in the drawer and take the checklists with us. The room cools when vows are spoken in clean language, and the corridor feels kinder. The plan after night 2 has rails and options. If the next window offers similar geometry, we will repeat the corridor with the same settings and add one small angle step near mid-run. If the window shifts too far, we will stand down and publish limits with a promise to wait. We will request an outside counterpass if a partner can spare time. We will keep the pipelines blind and independent. We will schedule a cool review after 24 hours before we upgrade any confidence. We will note what would defeat each claim in advance and tape those notes to the console. I hold one last image for the record. The sky sits cold and patient. The truss hums like a low string. The roll breathes on the console like a slow metronome. The planet's rim glows along the slit, and our voices keep to one idea per sentence. We count. We pause. We count again. We promise to speak slowly, to publish clearly, and to keep limits tight enough to protect meaning when excitement tries to break in. When Third Interstellar/Atlas returns, we will greet it with numbers instead of heat. We will greet it with steady hands, open files, and quiet pride. We will keep counting until quiet turns into shape and shape turns into proof that anyone can audit without haste or fear.